Let's just do it. Fuck it, we'll do it live.
Fuck it, we'll do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Fucking thing sucks. All right.
Bow. Waiting for it to go live. Tell me that we are live. That we are live. Oh, there it is. Hello.
Howdy.
Hello. How's everybody doing out there in the world? You doing all right? I hope you are, because we're going to talk about a lovely little movie today. A nice, charming throwback. Over, what, 80 years old now?
Yeah, 1940. So, yeah, 84.
Wow. Time flies. Pinocchio is probably one of the best adaptations of a classic fairy tale, though I'll admit it's not usually one of the first movies that comes to mind. Oh, we're going to talk all about its adaptationalness.
Oh, sure, we sure are.
Today.
Are you hearing
yes,
me,
I think it's quite nice. And I feel like I'm hearing you.
Okay, good.
I'm hearing you just fine.
Check. I'm keeping a close eye. Oh, there we go. Look at that. The chat's working this time. Fuck OBS. Holy
nice.
Shit.
Is it working like it did before? Or
well, the first two ones, no, not working like it did before. It's the new, the Giga Chat 2.0.
Oh, that's all right.
All you Giga Chatters out there, welcome. Stream.
But yes, I do think Pinocchio is quite successful as an adaptation of a fairy tale like story. Obviously, this story, it doesn't quite have the long running roots back into, like an oral tradition the same way Snow White does. This was written by a specific dude. But it does have that feeling. I feel like it, especially this movie, successfully captures the sort of fairy tale ethos.
The original story has a lot of that too, actually. So I did read it in preparation for today. Well, listened to it, but had it recited. It's pretty cool to go back and listen to it. It's a wild ride. Much more of a roller coaster, I would say.
So this one, the Disney movie has quite the ups and downs, I would say. Very
yeah.
I think it balances the tone quite well, considering all the crazy stuff that happens in it. Topaz Topaz dude says, "Wait, this isn't a review of the live action version?" No, I have not seen that. Well, that's a good question too. I have not seen the shitty Tom Hanks reimagining reboot that they did a couple years ago. It looked awful, horrendous, uncanny nightmare garbage. And I had no interest in subjecting myself to that.
You did watch Guillermo del Toro's, right?
I did. I did watch it. That's an interesting movie. There's a lot that I quite like about it. I still prefer the original 1940 Disney movie we're going to talk about today. But there's so much to admire about Guillermo's adaptation of this story, not least of which is the animation, of course. Stunning stop motion animation, some of the best that's ever been done. Truly incredible. I quite like it. It's a good movie. It's an easy recommend. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Go check it out if you haven't.
And have you seen the one with the Father, when can I leave to be on my own? Have you the meme Pinocchio? Have you seen that one?
I have not seen the meme Pinocchio.
Okay.
Is it Pauly Shore or something?
I believe so. Yeah, Pauly Shore.
Okay, I've heard of this, but I have not seen it. I have
seen the meme.
Pinocchio: A True Story is the name of it, apparently. It's a funny title. Yeah, Pauly Shore as Pinocchio, John Heder as Tybalt. Kenny as Geppetto, SpongeBob voice actor as Geppetto. Well, I mean, he's quite
very
the range.
Versatile, yeah.
Yes. But no, we will not be talking about the live action version because I've not seen it and I have no desire to see it. Not even for the meme.
A little bit. No, I found out recently too that they're currently in production of a live action version of Aristocats. I think we might have talked about that.
Oh God! No, why would you say that to me?
Why do that one of all of them that you could
Of
do.
all the ones to do in the I'm what I'm sure will be the shitty Lion King quote unquote live action animation of talking animals, why the Aristocats?
I have
They
no.
had that movie's so like fun and charming. Why would you? Anyway, I'm excited to rewatch that one because it's got some
Yes.
excellent music in it.
Oh, dude, Scatman Crothers playing the playing the house down, literally bringing the house down. I am pumped for that.
I was trying to remember, and yes, it is true that Robert Zemeckis directed the Tom Hanks Pinocchio live action abomination. Man, what happened to him? Jesus. I didn't watch the whole thing, but my girlfriend was watching it, and I sort of popped in and out. Death Becomes Her. Have you seen that movie?
No, no.
1992's Death Becomes Her, directed by Robert Zemeckis. Oh man, is it campy fun? It's
That's interesting.
it's
Nikki's been
it's
putting
very
together a
silly.
surprise list of horror movies for us to be watching in October. She's got like a basically a whole jar full of scary movie or horror movies.
You're gonna actually
Classic.
get like a goldfish bowl with a whole bunch
Yeah,
of pieces
basically.
of paper.
Yep,
Yeah,
and pull one out each time, each week, and that'll
that
be.
sounds fun. Are you
Yeah.
gonna try? Are you gonna do like once a week? Or are you gonna try to do the 31 horror
There
movies
is
in October?
no possible way, given the way that my work schedule and my commute is, that I will be able to
Yeah,
do 31 and 31. So
I've
yeah,
basically given up on that. I've done that 2 or 3 times now. Watching 31 horror movies in the month of October. That is, it's a lot. Your dreams get weird.
yeah.
Um,
Nikki managed last year, I think, to do like 40 in October because she just would sit and watch like whatever crap was on Peacock or like some kind of like TV
yeah.
horror movie from the 1970s. So I've seen, and I joined her for a few of them. I think I managed to do like 20, 24. It keeping up with all 31 gets exhausting after a
It's
while.
difficult. Unless you have a day or two, like a few days where you can knock out 3 or something, but who has time for that?
Yeah.
Um, Topaz Dude says, I always recommend to people if you ever find yourself in LA, New York City, or Chicago and a theater is showing an animated Disney in an IB Technicolor print, catch it. By far the best use of that format. What does IB stand for? I'm not familiar with that. Topaz, if you care to elaborate what the IB stands for.
Imbibition, a dye transfer operation.
Interesting. I've not heard of that before. But that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, because I would imagine that a Technicolor film presentation of one of these movies would be pretty stunning.
Yeah, I would very much. So the next one on the list is Fantasia, and that would be interesting to see in in a theater.
Yeah.
Uh,
Flannel McMantle, which is a great name, by the way. I don't know if I've ever acknowledged how great your name is, but I like it. Didn't Pinocchio basically not have any agency in the Tom Hanks one? I have heard that. Did they kind of ruin the whole ethos of the story?
what a strange
Like
thing to do. Why?
as an
Why would
being
Disney ever do something like
yeah, I
that?
know. It's shocking at this point that they would ever do such a thing. Yeah, I mean, because Pinocchio at its core, very simple, straightforward, possibly even blunt and on the nose, depending on how harsh you want to be. Morality tale. Very simple, very straightforward, very effective, I would argue. Um, I don't know why you'd try to undermine that aspect of it, but I don't know. Who knows what's going on in their heads these days?
No.
Howdy, friends. Yes, hello, everyone. Today, as you might have already guessed, we're going to be talking about 1940s Pinocchio from the man himself, Walt Disney. I really like this movie. I might even love it. It's one of those movies, I think I mentioned this when we talked about Snow White, but until I watched that Wisecrack video that I responded to on the channel, until I watched that video him trying to shit all over this movie, I didn't quite realize how much I loved it. And then rewatching it again, I'm like, man, this is a great movie. There's a lot of amazing stuff in here, and I just really like the core story a lot. I think there's a lot. It's pretty rich in a sort of like symbolic, thematic sense, and the animation is stunning. The characters are fun and funny. I quite like Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
Um, The animation is beautiful. I was really struck by this time watching it how the last act of the movie is all in the water and in the ocean. The water
Yeah,
animation is
it's
really good for
amazing.
1940. Yeah. I can't imagine how labor intensive that must have been. Like hand painting, hand drawing all of those wave effects. Incredible. And it's really good. It holds up. Really quite
It
impressive.
sure does. It really does. I had not seen this one because I didn't rewatch it at the time of the Wisecrack response, so I hadn't seen this one pretty much since I was a kid. Um, and rewatching it now after listening to the 5 hour audiobook version, I'm pretty impressed with the adaptation. I think they did a really good. It's a lot better of an adaptation of the full story, especially than the Wisecrack guy gave it credit for. I think it hits everything that the original author intended to do with it in a much more child-friendly version. To the point where I mean, so we've talked about this already, right? But the wisecrack man who bemoaned the loss of the original ending of Pinocchio being that he's lynched by some people for being by lynched by the fox and the cat who convince him to be an actor in the Walt Disney. Hilarious, by the way. The
Oh, there's so much to say about
yeah.
that, but we'll get
Um,
to it.
he bemoaned the loss of that original ending, and only pays like mild lip service to the fact that even at the time, everybody was outraged. They were like, "What the fuck, man? This is not a children's story. Like, you
Yeah.
you need to finish this." And he ended up. So he says in the video too that it was a begrudging completion of the story. Like, or
Yeah.
he grumbled about it and then finished it off. He wrote more about in the second half than he did in the first half. So I don't know if I would call that necessarily begrudging. He could have just, powered through like one or two chapters to get to the end. But
Slapped and ending together, yeah.
yeah, slapped an ending together and, been on his way. But he did a lot of work in the back half of that story to really give the redemptive arc a place to shine.
Yeah.
And it was only after he finished that and it was published as one collective book that it gained, the international success that it has seen since it was published,
Interesting.
basically. So like even people at the time realized like maybe don't end with the child being lynched guy.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
maybe
not the best way.
maybe if you're trying to teach kids how to be good, ending with and if you're bad, they'll kill you, isn't quite as strong as, offering the pathway of redemption, like how you can actually, even no matter how bad you get, you can turn it around and redeem yourself kind of thing. That's probably a better message for kids, I would say.
Yeah. I would agree. I would think I would agree with that.
But yeah, if you don't remember, it's kind of a wild video still. It haunts me a little bit, that wisecrack video, where basically the entire argument for how Disney ruined culture, which, I think there are arguments you could make about how they did that, but their whole thesis was that Disney ruined culture because they made adaptations of fairy tale stories that were too wholesome and cute and nice. And that ruined culture. Of all the things to,
Yeah, because the culture was doing real well back when everybody revolted at the end of the children's story Pinocchio, ending with him
yeah,
being hung from an oak tree. Back in the 1800s when the culture still thought that was a weird way to end a kid's story.
yeah.
Interesting.
And of course, to make that argument, he had to do a lot of things like ignoring all the very real dark moments that happened in these movies. Um, in my response, I mentioned Snow White fleeing from the huntsman who was there to kill her and fleeing through the woods and all the horrifying imagery and all that sort of fun stuff. And obviously, the evil queen who's trying to kill her. Um, but in Pinocchio, there's even more of that, I would say. I think this movie gets pretty dark for a children's story,
Yeah,
not least because he's sold into slavery. That's kind of bleak for a kid's story, you know?
yeah. Not least because of that, there's also quite a lot of horror imagery being used.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
I absolutely love the sequence where Lampwick is turning into a donkey. It's horrifying. It's great. It's so well executed. It's classic horror movie imagery too, with like these, especially when the main transformation shot that happens, we see it on in his shadow on the wall.
yeah,
Like that's straight up horror movie imagery. Donald's angry ass, is chat still broken? It looks like it reset.
yeah. It it does look like that. It missed a lot of chats in between that as well. I'm keeping an eye on both. Um,
OBS is being real pain in the dick hole about the chat on screen. I don't know what happened. We had this little bit of code where it would make the chat transparent. Nothing fancy. A lot of people have it, and then it just stopped
yeah,
recognizing
stopped
that.
working, stopped recognizing it. I've done a bunch of resets trying to fix it, and it has not worked. It has all just given me a big floppy wiener in my face, and I don't care for that. I don't like that. So I've tried a new thing here, and it's it's
I, I like that Aladdin is confused by chat. I agree.
yes,
It's a nice detail. Yes, to Topaz's point, it's kind of crazy all the very real criticisms you could make of Disney, and then the one they chose to make was like, oh, all those movies you love, they were too cute, weren't they? That totally ruined everything. It's like, are you insane? Also, of course, in his video, and this is probably the most egregious part in my opinion, was that he threw basically all the animators and artists and writers that put their hard work and passion into these movies, implying that basically they're just doing as a cynical way to make money because they know cute equals money. And it's like, actually go fuck yourself. Um,
yeah. Actually, they labored pretty intensely over making this movie because they really, really wanted it to not only succeed but to be a fun children's movie. Um,
And it has all the classics things. It's interesting to watch these all in order, which if you don't know, that's sort of the arc we're on among covering, other movies as they come out. We're going to go through all the classic theatrically released 2D animated Disney movies. So we did Snow White a couple weeks ago, and now we're on Pinocchio. It's interesting to watch them in order to see the sort of slow evolution, what they share in common. So, quite a bit like Snow White, this movie has a lot of cute animals doing cute, silly things. So that stuff's fun. It's got roughly the same proportion of songs, um, probably less than the average like movie musical, but still way more songs than a normal movie. Um, and then it takes some dark turns. I also think one of the things that was really interesting to me in terms of the animation style of Pinocchio is that like Snow White, there's a decent amount of characters who have the what will become the classic Disney style, the big expressive eyes and all that sort of fun stuff. But the like Snow White, who herself has got that sort of rotoscoped, more realistic proportions style to her, the blue fairy has that same sort of effect. Geppetto kind of looks, except for the giant nose, looks a bit like the dwarves from the last movie, and Pinocchio has that sort of big cartoony style as well. But the fairy, anyone who's meant to be seen as like beautiful, still has that more rotoscoped looking style, which I thought is interesting. And I think when we finally see Pinocchio become a real boy at the end, he looks a little less cartoony, which I found interesting as well.
that is an interesting point. Pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. I really like the rotoscoped animation. It feels very nostalgic. When she comes
Yeah.
in like that. I I I just really like watching the evolutions of the like this one's a little bit more ambitious, I would say, than Snow White on its scope,
Yes.
especially in that last half
Oh my
and like that
goodness,
final
yes.
act. There is a lot happening on screen when the fish are pouring into Monstro's mouth. Like all the waves are rushing, and then when they're paddling away, it's
It's very intense
it
too.
is wild. Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful to watch. The color, like the whale, has a lot of. It almost looks like colored pencil texture around his stomach when he's moving, which is really just
Hmm.
it's very very different. The whale
Yes.
specifically is very different from the rest of what happens in the movie. So I'm very excited to crack into this and talk about it. But again, I think that a lot better of an adaptation generally than especially Wisecrack gave it credit for. And that it probably, like, especially given the research that I was, like, the very basic internet research that I was doing before starting the stream, it seems like the general consensus is something along the lines of like, oh well, it was supposed to end in a very cynical and harsh manner and all that. Um, I think that a lot of the people who make that criticism are really missing the point of the back half of the story.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the original story because I haven't read it myself. I've only done like a Wikipedia sort of scan of how the story goes. So, but before you jump into that, sort of, I want to hear like the rough synopsis of the similarities and differences. I wanted to acknowledge Helmuth in chat who said that this is Jordan Peterson's favorite movie. It certainly seems to be among his favorite. He's talked quite a bit about it in his career, and he has a lot of really valuable things to say about it, some of which we'll talk about today in terms of the symbolism of the story and the message and all that stuff. It's quite good, and I think one of the things I agree with him most strongly on is just it's so, what would you say, like thematically and symbolically rich and meaningful, especially in the back half in terms of rescuing his father and everything he has to do to become a real boy. Because a really interesting choice to start off, like the blue fairy comes down and grants him the gift of life, but he's not a real boy yet. That he has to do himself.
Yeah, and when
It's a real
the blue fairy does that because of a wish made by Geppetto, right? Like
yes.
that's kind of Geppetto is wishing that he we can just jump into the beginning of it, I suppose, because in the opening of the movie, Geppetto is a creative person. He's got a cozy little life in his cabin, but
Something's missing, Hugh.
something's missing, and that is, he wants a child. He wants a son. He wishes that his little Pinocchio could be a real boy. And so the fairy, because Geppetto has given so much joy to others, comes down and says, you deserve some happiness of your own. And so she gives him a child. She turns Pinocchio into a animated marionette. So right off the bat, there's a big difference from the original story.
Yeah, go for it.
So the original story, Geppetto wants to make a marionette, and he goes to somebody, like, he's considered a generally unpleasant man. Geppetto is in the town. He makes his little marionettes and everything, but he's very poor, and he gets really, really mad at everybody because he has a big red nose. Like a big circular red nose, and everybody calls him Old Cherry Nose, and he gets so pissed off when people call him this that he physically assaults them in the street. So very different. And he comes to a woodworker, who the woodworker has found a piece of oak that is really, it's talking aloud to him, and it's very obnoxious, and he's not a fan of it, and he tries to kill it a couple times, and it doesn't work. So Geppetto comes to him and asks for a piece of wood to make a marionette, and because the guy doesn't like Geppetto very much, he gives him this obnoxious talking piece of wood, which Geppetto then accidentally makes into a marionette that can move and talk.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a very different message in that way. Geppetto is
But it's
also
interesting because I didn't realize that Walt Disney brought the whole wishing upon a star thing to this movie. I assumed part of that at least would be in the original, but no,
Nope.
that just seems to be Walt Disney's favorite trope of all time.
Yeah.
His wishes coming true. Obviously Snow White makes a big deal of that as well. That's really interesting. I thought that would have been in the original.
Nope. Not in the original. There's a lot of the early chapters are very full of like violent slapstick. There's a lot of fights. There's a lot of fights, and then making it. It's very Italian, Like there's a lot of fights, and then they make up, and then they fight again. So that's where the differences like really shine a lot more is at the beginning of the story, because that's the first half of the story is the part the irredeemable Pinocchio part, the evil Pinocchio, the mischievous one. He's just sort of given over to being he's just sort of given over to being a mischievous little prick, basically.
Yeah. He's a bit older too, right? In how he's characterized. He's a slightly older kid. And so the way he acts out is a little bit different than the way, because Pinocchio is just sort of naive and being led by malcontents throughout the movie. He's
much more naive. Naive and childishly so, right? Like he asks a lot of why questions.
Yeah, and selfishness is part of it too. He's just, he takes to Pleasure Island quite quickly. He's like, yeah, this is great. I like this. This is great. And there's a line even when I forget exactly what he's doing. I can't remember if I think it's when they go to the model house where you just destroy things, which is a great touch, by the way. Where he's like, man, being bad is fun. So clearly he's getting some enjoyment from it, but it's not quite the same sort of mischievous, slightly older acting out that happens in the original story, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, immediately after he becomes, comes to life, Geppetto gets taken to jail for, basically strangling him in the streets because he's so fed up with him being a menace. And people call the cops on him, and Geppetto gets sent to prison, and then Pinocchio is all by himself in the house, and he's very, very hungry, and so somebody comes and brings him some food, and then he refuses to eat it because he's a picky eater too. Like it's all of those classic like bad child tropes, and it's meant to sort of be a cathartic downfall for you when this little brat gets strung up and hung, and you get that really vivid description of how he's his death shudders as he passes away. Very
so that's probably the biggest difference in the adaptation.
The biggest difference in the adaptation, very much.
Does his nose grow when he lies?
Yes.
Okay.
His nose does grow when he lies, and it like in this movie, it only happens like once or twice. It doesn't happen very often. Which is interesting to me that like that's the thing that most people remember about, everybody remembers that about Pinocchio, is that it grows when it's
probably really the most iconic thing, but it's such a small part of the movie, all things considered. Really quick, Retro Hale, who says, greetings. I know it's been a while, but I really enjoyed your Fallout TV show coverage. Oh, thanks. I really did not enjoy it and was happy to find others saw the same flaws that I did in the show. Yes, that was quite a horrendous piece of writing, the Fallout show.
The nice thing is that it made me go and revisit playing the original Fallout games, the point and click turn-based Fallout ones, and those are some fantastic pieces of media that I otherwise probably would have gone back to. So
the silver lining.
Yeah, little bit of a nice thing, at least something good came out of that. That and Walton Goggins, at the very least, he seems like
he had fun, and I'm sure he had a good paycheck, so good for him.
Good for him. Get that bag, buddy.
Let's see okay, so what sort of acting out like misadventures does he get into in the story in the original?
He basically convinces Geppetto to let him go to school at one point, and so Geppetto, who's like dirt poor, goes out to sell after he gets out of prison, goes out to sell his coat for a ABC book, and then when Pinocchio goes off to school, he basically immediately sells the ABC book in order to get into the puppet show.
Wow, what a little prick.
Yeah. He immediately gets distracted by that, and then that's when he sort of runs away. There's also a bunch of stuff where I think after Geppetto's been put in prison, before he comes back and gets to go to school, he actually meets Jiminy Cricket, who's a 100-year-old, written as a 100-year-old philosopher in the original story. And when the cricket is telling him, you better shape up, better not be such a little asshole all the time, and Pinocchio kind of doesn't want to hear it, he kills Jiminy Cricket.
Oh my goodness.
He throws a hammer at him and kills him immediately, basically. And that is the end of Jiminy in the first half of the story.
Wait, does Jiminy come back?
He does. He comes back as a ghost because the fairy is also a ghost in the book.
Okay.
She pretends to be his sister for a while, but then she gets older and then takes on a more maternal figure, which is strange. Not
okay. Like, so if
feels
he's
a little more improv, kind of.
In the original, he's a bit older. He's a bit more actively asshole-ish.
Yeah, and he's prone to violent outbursts as well.
Yeah. So it strikes me as different, meaningfully, obviously, but in a way that I think both have their merit in terms of storytelling. They're both trying to do slightly different things, I would say. Obviously, coding Pinocchio, well, not coding, but depicting Pinocchio as younger in this definitely has some different implications for the kind of bad things he does. So how does Pinocchio redeem himself in the back half that he rewrote after people didn't like?
After people didn't,
grisly ends he met.
He ends the first 15 or so chapters are characterized by him kind of like not learning from his antics until he finally is hung from the neck by the fox and the cat. And the reason that they do this is because he ends up somehow coming into possession of 5 pieces of gold. And the fox and the cat tell him that they'll take him somewhere to a field where he can plant the gold pieces, and then that 5 will turn into 2,500, and he can, all he has to do is plant them and then fall asleep in the field, and then the next morning they'll be there. But he ends up not doing that. He hides them under his tongue to get them, to keep them out of the hands of the cat and the fox, and then they hang him, and they promise they'll come back to get the money from him after he's dead. Is basically how that goes. He ends up not dying because he's a puppet, and he doesn't breathe really. But his redemption comes from saving his father from the belly of a shark. It's not a whale in the story, but it is monstrous and gigantic. He also eventually ends up going to school and studying really well for a while. And then he gets peer pressured into going to Epstein Island by the rest of the kids, who start turning into donkeys.
Yeah.
And then
so all of that is broadly similar.
All of that is very similar. In the story, Pinocchio becomes a donkey. And he's bought by a circus master who tries to teach him how to do tricks. He breaks his legs and becomes lame. So somebody comes to purchase him for 4 cents in order to skin him and turn him into a drum. But he doesn't want to skin him, he doesn't want to kill him in any normal way. He decides, quote unquote, to be merciful, and ties a stone to the donkey's legs and drops him into the ocean to drown the donkey. The fish eat away at the donkey carcass on the outside, leaving Pinocchio, revealing Pinocchio underneath, and going through that process kind of makes him a little bit more mature, and eventually he ends up going to school and taking a job on a farm and working very hard to take care of Geppetto. He saves up a bunch of money to buy himself some clothes, but then on his way to buy the clothes, a friend of the fairy arrives and asks him to give him, and basically asks him, the fairy's very sick, she's in a hospital, do you have any money to help her? And so Pinocchio gives him all the money. Instead of using it on himself, he gives the friend of the fairy all the money so that she can get better, and that's how she realizes that he's redeemed himself, and he has become worthy of being a real boy.
Interesting. The back half actually sounds decent.
Yeah, the back. Honestly, the back. Like, I was not enjoying the opening bit for a while, but the back half is not terrible.
I kind of like the detail that he sort of turns into a donkey and then is sort of drowned in the ocean, and the fish kind of eat away, leaving only
him. Yeah,
that's kind of interesting from a symbolic perspective.
And Stromboli in the movie is a guy named Fire Eater in the book. So another thing that he does at that point is Pinocchio. He's gonna throw Pinocchio on a fire to cook some food. And initially he says, no, don't do that. And he goes, okay, fine. I'll throw the other marionette on the fire. And all the other marionettes are, alive as well. And so Pinocchio then offers to sacrifice himself to save the other marionettes. And that helps. That helps it too. Yeah, that's part of it as well. And that's in the front half of the book. So, there are glimmers of it in there, right? But immediately after doing that is when all the rest of the shit goes down too. So yeah, it's interesting. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but yes,
yeah. I certainly think that's a stronger ending than he was hung by a fox and a cat
for not giving up his money because which is one of the, it's a strange thing that I can't find any confirmation anywhere that there was outrage really at I can find confirmation that people were not happy with the ending, but I can't find any confirmation that the author begrudgingly finished the story. And because of how much of it he wrote afterward, and because of how strong the symbolism is, part of me wonders if he didn't do that as a sort of way of how you might end a first season of a TV show on a cliffhanger, of a popular TV show on a cliffhanger, to sort of try to blackmail a studio into giving you a little bit of a little bit more leeway in making your second season. Look at the fans. The fans aren't going to like it if you don't give me a contract to write, a 22 episode season to follow up this 6-episode one. You give yourself a little bit of leverage, to tip the scales. That's something that I feel like
might have been.
It seems to me anyway, it might have been an attempt at that. The only I really can't find any indicator that he didn't want to finish the story. I can't find any proof of that anywhere. If that is out there and somebody has found it, feel free to prove me wrong. But it doesn't seem like that's the whole story to me. So
yeah,
I'd be curious.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
There's some interesting changes. It is interesting to note that a lot of the stuff in the back half is what's the most similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's jump in. Let's jump into the story of 1940s Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
All right.
We are in a small little Italian village with the woodworker Geppetto.
Yes.
Can I just say Jiminy
that I love Geppetto in this movie. I love his voice. He's just very charming and fun. Something as soon as he started speaking, it gave me all this nostalgic flashbacks when I was a kid. I don't know. There's something about the voice actor's performance as Geppetto that's quite fun. Yes. So we're introduced to Geppetto. Well, first we're introduced to Jiminy Cricket.
Jiminy Cricket, yeah. He's singing, or he's kind of doing an a cappella rendition of "When You Wish Upon a Star" at first.
And he's right next to the storybook, so that's kind of similar to Snow White as well. Starts with the storybook, and then we go into the pages essentially. And so he's our narrator in the beginning. He doesn't do a ton of narrating throughout the movie. He does talk to camera. But he doesn't quite narrate it. But he starts off and he tells the story of how he came upon Geppetto in this. He doesn't say Italian, but
a little quaint little village. In the beneath the mountains. This little village, and it's just a really charming opening. I like the Depression era stuff from these early
Oh
design, the
yeah,
Depression era design that they do, especially like it wasn't as prevalent, I don't think, in Snow White, but in this one, I mean, Jiminy's got his little shoes with no toes.
yeah.
He's got his ratty hat and coat. Uh, the fox and the
It's
cat
kind of a
will sort of have
drifter.
the same
Yeah.
sort of look as well, which is
Yes.
like a fun symbolic note. How Jiminy Cricket is a good guy with that sort of look, and then the fox and the cat are not. So I
Yeah.
just I
So he's
enjoy it.
wandering around. He doesn't seem to have a place to stay or a job or anything of the sort. He comes into this cozy little cottage. He's like, "Oh, this is great. Look at that fire." I think he says something to the effect of like, "Oh, I didn't like. What a shame that there's that beautiful fire and no one's around to enjoy it." So he
Yeah,
goes
yeah.
into the
Didn't want to
house.
let a cozy fire like that go to waste. So he comes in and
Exactly.
he. I really like the comedy as well in this, like the wry jokes that they do. Like
Yeah,
he
there's some
starts
really funny
warming
stuff.
starts warming his butt at the fire, and he's like, when I was warming my myself at
Myself,
yeah,
yeah.
it's it's just really it's really charming, like it's you can tell that those are the ones that are there for the adults.
Yes. And there's a decent amount of those usually coming from Jiminy. I'm jumping ahead, but one of my favorite lines from him, because it caught me off guard, I'd totally forgotten about it. So he later, when Pinocchio is at the marionette show, he goes there to try and he goes there and he
He wants
sees
to be a
him.
hater. He's there to be a professional hater.
And
I
he says like, "Oh, go ahead, make a fool of yourself. Then maybe you'll listen to your conscience." And then the show actually goes well, and everyone likes him. And he goes, "Oh, well, I guess he doesn't need me anymore." And as he's walking away, he goes like, "Ah, what does an actor need with a conscience anyway?"
I knew that was where you were going. I
Yeah,
cracked up when he said that. There were a lot of moments in this one where I laughed out loud at some of the things that Jiminy says. You know,
yeah, they're funny.
they're really
It's
funny.
good stuff.
I like in this beginning part with Geppetto too, where he's watching him from the shadows, and he puts his hand out on the one girl, the girl doll's butt, and then he
Yeah,
realizes what he's done. He goes, "I beg pardon," and, like
yeah.
looks away and gets all blushy. Another
What?
interesting thing,
Go
just
ahead.
given that we talked about how the fire is what draws Jiminy in the book. The fire Geppetto is so poor that his fireplace is painted. It is fake. There's no
Interesting.
real fire. He does have a little stove, and Pinocchio ends up burning his legs off because he sleeps too long with his feet on the stove. And then he has to beg Geppetto to build him legs, which is kind of a fun little bit of antics, but not quite
Not the same vibe.
not
We'll
quite
say
the
that.
same vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you get the sense in with Geppetto here that like, yeah, he's poor, but he's making do. He's keeping himself busy, and he's
Yeah.
doing his best. He's a toy maker, I think they say. Toy maker, clock maker, woodworker. He does all that kind of stuff. He makes things for the joy of making them, and that's one of the things that he does with this one, right? Is like he
Yeah.
finishes painting Pinocchio, and he's so overcome with the joy of having completed it that he hops up and plays around with his music boxes and his clocks and everything for a little while, and he harasses his cat and his goldfish a little bit.
Yeah. He like I, I like when he like plays little pranks on his cat with the marionette. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I when he's chasing it around and doing all that good stuff. So yeah.
Oh, another little aside with Jiminy that's pretty funny. So this is before he starts dancing around with him, but he's painting the face on him, painting the smile and the eyebrows and all that sort of stuff, and marveling at how much better it looks. And Jiminy agrees, and he kind of turns to this almost gargoyle like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
carving next to him, who's got a frown on his face, and he says, "Very good, huh?" And he turns to him, he sees his grimace, and he's like, "Well, you can't please everybody."
I like the side eye that he gives that thing too afterward.
Yeah,
Like the animation is just so good, man. Like
yeah.
they really,
Very expressive, very charming.
yeah. It's really a joy to kind of like notice these little details that happen in like these little personal details, these personality things, right? Like you can tell that he's an optimist, right? He's trying, but he gives him that little like side eye scowl, like, oh, why you got to be so hard to please, you know?
Yeah. He has sort of funny interactions with inanimate objects in this movie. Like when Geppetto starts dancing around with him, he turns his little music boxes on. They start playing little songs, and because he's hiding from him at this point, Jiminy is stuck underneath it, and all the gears and stuff are moving and hitting him. He's like, "Man, there's a lot of downbeats down here."
Yeah, that one I laughed at that one too. Yeah,
it's silly stuff. I like it.
me too. Big fan. And so Geppetto and him, they dance around for a little while. He harasses his pets, and then he realizes it's late and he's tired, so he needs to go to bed.
Oh, you know what's kind of funny? I found funny about that is the clock strikes whatever time it is. They don't say specifically, but you can look at the clock, I'm sure. And then all the clocks on the wall, they start cuckooing and doing all their little quirky little alarm sounds. And then he hears all that, we see all it, and then he goes, "Oh, what? I wonder what time it is." And then he pulls like
out he pulls out his pocket watch. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, "Oh, you didn't want to look at the wall? Okay, that's fine."
That's another little example of like this quaint sort of like just like nice style of humor, you know, like it's really these dry little moments where I'm like, that feels like a classic movie, you know? That's like that's cinema, baby. Scorsese approved.
And so then he says good night, moon, and good night all to all his pets and all that sort of stuff. And then he's winding down to bed, and he's like smoking his pipe in bed right before he's gonna like the little bed for the cat, a nice little touch. And then he's like, "Oh, like Figaro, I forgot to open the window." And Figaro like is like all grumpy, like, and it's like huffing and puffing. Then he goes to open the window. More classic Disney cute animals doing cute things. He opens the window, and then the light from the moon and the stars is shining through. And that's when Geppetto sees the wishing star, as he calls it, the brightest star in the sky. And he sees it and immediately makes a wish on it that
and that's
Pinocchio.
The Starlight Starbright. And I don't know, is that something that Disney wrote?
That's a good question. You keep talking. I'm going to look it up.
Okay. Well, I was on the but yeah, he does the Starlight Starbright. First star I see tonight. I wish I
wish I may. I wish I might
have this wish I wish tonight. Right.
Yeah. Starlight Starbright is an English language nursery rhyme of American origin. It has a rowed folk song. I don't know what that means. The lyrics usually conform to the following: Starlight Starbright, first star I see tonight. I wish I may. I wish I might have this wish I wish tonight. It appears to predate Pinocchio.
Okay, interesting. It
was kind of a colloquial, cultural American children's song that was used in the movie. That's what Wikipedia is implying.
Okay, well, fair enough. But yeah, I just for a second there, given Disney's proclivity for including wishes in these stories, where they do not exist in the original ones, right? Like Snow White doesn't have a wish element in the story, and neither does this one. So I was just wondering if maybe he had, come up with that on his own. He certainly was a creative enough guy. That might
Doesn't appear that he came up with it on his own, but clearly he liked it. I mean, it's definitely, this is the most famous inclusion of it, I would say.
Yes.
Yes, so he makes a wish, and
he wishes Pinocchio would become a little boy.
Become a real boy.
Real lad.
Yes. Wouldn't that be nice? And then he goes to bed. Everyone settles down. Everyone starts snoring. And then there's just a fun little moment where, like, the clocks go off again. And Jiminy's like, maybe this is a bad idea. This place is noisy as hell. All the
Geppetto's
clocks on the
wall. Snoring like fucking crazy. It's funny because my dad put a... he might be in the chat here, too. I don't know. But my dad put he had this thing a while ago where he put a cuckoo clock for some reason in our house when I was still living there, and that thing annoyed the ever loving shit out of me because they are so loud. They are just really obnoxious. This kind of
Especially
gave me,
the cuckoo clock,
yeah,
like a grandfather clock with the bells and chimes a little less annoying because it's a bit deeper, more
yeah.
resonant, not as grating, but even still, that can be a little obnoxious sometimes.
Like when it hits 12 and that thing is going cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo 12 times in a row. It's like just nobody's counting them. Nobody's counting them.
Yeah. No one's sitting there in silence waiting to find out what time it is
Gee,
from
I
these
wonder.
things.
Oh, wait, I can't wait until the fucking clock goes off at once every half hour to tell me when a half hour has passed. God.
How
Anyway,
would you
we
know the time is even passing if you didn't have that?
if I didn't have that, and then like the incredibly loud like click clack of it going back and forth. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when it's at night. Yeah, so that triggered me a little bit. With I felt Jiminy's pain. I understood where he was coming from. I also really like when he kind of just yells quiet and everything stops.
Yeah, I
Uh,
wanted to talk about that. First, Dr. Diddler, thank you very much for the super chat. Fun fact, Pinocchio's name comes from the onomatopoeia you get from saying his name. What does that mean? Pinocchio? I don't I don't quite get. I thought I don't actually know. Does it say in the original story what the name comes from? Does it mean pine boy or something of that nature? Because he's not made out of pine, is he? He-
uh,
He's oak, isn't he?
it comes from it. Like, he wrote it. The book is really famous for being written in Tuscan dialect,
Okay.
um, kind of in the same way as like a Robert Burns in a Scottish, dialect might have
Sure.
been. But the word Pinocchio in Italian means pine nut. So it could be something like that, but it also could be a combination of words from Pino, meaning pine tree, or pine wood, and Occhio, meaning eye. So
Unclear exactly, but
unclear
there's
what the
definitely a
origins are.
wood influence there.
Yeah,
Also in the original, he was made of plastic for merchandising.
I,
What?
f- I feel like you're joking, and it might
Oh,
have gone over our heads there a little
okay, it
bit.
might be.
But thank you
Sorry,
for the $5 to
sorry,
make us
Doctor
look like
Diddler.
morons.
um, yes. So we get to the moment where the clocks are going off, the snoring, and Jiminy's like enough already, and he yells quiet, and then everything stops. What I kind of like about that, because it is kind of on the surface just funny that he yells quiet and all the clocks stop, but also that's the exact moment that the star comes into the room and turns into the fairy. So it's almost a bit like a coincidence, and what's actually happening is just that like time is kind of stopping for this moment, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of it that way because he does
It
that.
kind of works
Everything
either
stops.
way.
The
Yeah.
snoring of like Geppetto
Also
and the cat and
stops.
everything
Yeah.
also stops. And
Everything kind of freezes, time
yeah, and then
freezes,
the
and
light
it's
comes in, and he goes, "Oh,
yeah.
what now?" And then she
Yeah.
floats into the room,
Oh,
and yeah,
speaking of animation stuff, I absolutely love the sort of magical effect that happens when the light turns into her, when she gives life to Pinocchio, when she disappears, when she gives Jiminy Cricket his new clothes, that sort of shimmering circular light effect that they
yeah, the
use.
radiance.
Oh, it's so good. I love it. Just beautiful. And I don't know, it's very like fitting. It's exactly what you'd hope it would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It just works really well. It's a really nice effect. I'm kind of curious how they did it. I don't really know enough about old animation to know what exactly that is. Obviously, it's hand painted, but like, why that choice? It's a really nice effect. I like it. It's very magical.
it, it looks a little bit like a star, right? Like
A little bit,
a
yeah.
bit of a starburst kind of effect. So that might have something to do with it.
I also like that she's a little bit see through the blue fairy, like slightly in certain shots. She can kind of see through her, so she's kind of
Ephemeral,
ghostly in that
yeah.
respect. Yeah,
When it's a nice callback to the fact that in the story, the original story, she is sort of a ghost. That
yeah.
she haunts him in a way. Is interesting. And this is where she tells him that he has to prove himself brave, truthful, and unselfish to earn becoming a real boy.
Yeah, she says that. Well, she says, well, I like the exact wording here. So I just want to get it. Do 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 do. So he says, "As I leave and breathe, a fairy." And he, I also like this is sorry, this is something they do a lot in this movie, where Jiminy Cricket is always having these kind of like a classier version of like a horn dog moment with all these different female
Yes.
animals, and he's got real hubba hubba energy when it comes to the blue fairy. There's so many of those moments in here. Even like
he has a lot of those just in general. I mean, like he touches the one girl doll's butt is,
yeah,
the
even at
one.
the end when the stakes are really high, they're going into the scary ocean to go find the whale. He has that sort of little moment with a female fish, or
Yeah.
clearly like was supposed to be a girl fish. I don't know. They're kind of funny the way they're sprinkled in like that. So she says, "Good Geppetto, you have given so much happiness to others. You deserve to have your wish come true," which is an interesting change, obviously, from the original story, where in the original he's a kind of curmudgeonly, crotchety old man. In this one, he's really nice and he brings joy to people, but he hasn't had the sort of ultimate joy of a child in his life yet. For whatever reasons, it's not really made explicit. And she says, "Little puppet made of pine, wake, the gift of life is thine," which I like the way that's phrased. It's nice. Got a slightly poetic
Yeah.
twinge to it. Then he wakes up and rubs his eyes and all that stuff. God, the animation for Pinocchio is really cool. And then there's another little aside that he has. This is one of my favorite ones where so the blue fairy comes into the room and brings this wooden doll to life, and then they cut to Jim and he says, "Whew, what they can't do these days." That's really funny. That's a really good line.
A lot of this really, like, it really holds up, especially Jiminy Cricket's stuff. It's like, yeah, no, this is the same kind. Like, people are still making these kinds of jokes. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Speaking
great,
of jokes,
very timeless.
Dr. Diddler has confirmed that yes, he was being facetious, and I didn't notice it at all. I'm sorry, Dr. Diddler. I have failed you, but thank you for the $5. Very kind. So what they can't do these days. So he comes to life and he's like, "I can walk, I can move, I can talk," all that sort of fun stuff. And she says, "I've
Yes.
given you life." And he's like, "Why?" Classic little kid. He's in his Y phase already. He's moving along quite quickly. He says, "Because tonight Geppetto wished for a real boy." He says, "Am I a real boy?" She says, "No," which is kind of funny in a sense. Like, he wished for a real boy, and I've come here and I've given you the gift of life. And he's like, "Am I a real boy?" And she's like, "Nope, not yet. You got to do that entirely yourself," which is really good. I really like that. One of the things that I'd never really given it much thought until coming across that wisecrack video that took a huge dump all over this movie, is that basically it's just this really great story about like what it means to be a good person, what it means to grow up, what it means, because I mean, if you think about it symbolically, it's rather simple, but he's a puppet the way like a child is just kind of puppeted around by everything going on around them, their parents, their friends, the people they interact with, what they're told, and they're puppeted around by their like raging emotions, especially when they're like 2 and 3. They just all have all these emotions. They haven't really gained control of themselves yet. They're just kind of puppeted around each direction. And a big part of what it means to grow up and mature and become civilized is to sort of gain control over yourself and become a real boy and that sort of thing. So obviously the puppet metaphor is quite apt, and so she brings him to life, gives Geppetto the gift of this life, but becoming a real true boy, brave, truthful and unselfish, that's entirely up to him. It's a really nice mix of because there's a lot of Christian imagery in this story. At least at the ethos of it. Obviously, she's not referred to as an angel; she's referred to as a fairy, but she's very much angelic
Very
in her
angelic. Yeah.
depiction. Yeah, and in the classic Christian conception of things, there's always a big argument between like grace and works in terms of like what makes you a good person. And this is like that being like the grace of God making you, giving you the ability to become a good person and all that sort of stuff, or like what you actually do as a person being what gets you in heaven, sort of thing. That sort of debate rages on, especially between like Catholics and Protestants and all that sort of fun stuff. And this story kind of has a little bit of both in a good way. Like all this starts because this sort of higher being from the heavens comes down and like gives this gift, but then of course to like make full and appropriate use and potential out of that gift, you have to, do the work yourself.
Yeah, it's a
Which
little bit like the idea of having free will, but using it to help others, right, rather than self. Or, you know,
yeah,
having free will and using it to serve as opposed to for your own
yeah.
selfish. You know?
It's just a really nice combination. I really like that choice that because she doesn't fully grant him his wish. She like gets the ball rolling in a sense.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a classic morality tale. Definitely resonates strongly with Christian imagery. But this is this is a classic sort of morality play from across cultures as well. That's not
oh
something
yeah,
that
it's certainly not limited to it, and I didn't
yeah.
mean to imply that. I was just sort of saying that like
Well, I'm
using
not
that
saying that you would
conception of it.
imply that. I'm just, a lot of people, especially, I think maybe, a wisecrack type person, might
Yeah,
imply that because it is, it very clearly resonates in a way with, Christian morals and values, that, that it's dated in some sense for that. I would strongly disagree. I
yeah.
think that it's just
I mean,
in general.
the self-sacrificial aspect and component of this story is obviously the biggest part of it. That like the most iconic thing, we mentioned this already, the sort of truth telling and the lying and the nose. That's the most iconic part. But real like bravery. What I forget exactly the order. Is it bravery, truthfulness, and uh,
Unselfish, yeah.
unselfishness?
Selflessness,
Yes,
yeah. Selflessness.
selflessness, and that's kind of the order of importance as well, like in a ascending order. Like ultimately to save his dad, he has to be willing to sacrifice himself.
Yeah.
And that's how he redeems himself. That's how he proves that he's an adult. Well, not an adult, but he's a real boy, right? It's great, really, really good. I just the sort of fundamentals of the story are very effective and compelling to me. It's really nice. So the blue fairy tells him that someday you will be a real boy, but it's entirely up to you. And like what you'll have to learn right from wrong. He's like right from wrong, but how will I know? I like the dialogue they give Pinocchio. Like he's literally just been born, and I like the way he talks. It's funny
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. I so this happens a little bit after this because we haven't gotten through Jiminy's dubbing as Pinocchio's conscience. But when he's in bed with Geppetto after Geppetto has awoken and figured out what's going on, he says, "Well, we got to go to sleep. You've got to go to school tomorrow." And he goes, "Why?" So that you can learn things and get smart. Why? And then I love Geppetto. Because. Oh,
Because I said so.
because because. And Pinocchio just goes, "Oh," and that's the end of the scene.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
I
It's
really,
very
I really like it, man. I like that.
uh lazy fucking fairies won't even grant full wishes anymore. I know. Like, what are
This
you
is
even for?
yeah, the
The fairy
degeneration of
the, the fairy lives in a
American
blue
work
house with a
ethic.
blue car, and everything she does is blue. It's true.
Yeah, she's even bluer in the book. They mention that she has blue hair for some reason,
Ah,
azure hair,
woke.
turquoise hair. Yeah,
Pinocchio's
exactly.
gone woke.
Pinocchio was woke.
It's been woke this whole time. No wonder Wisecrack doesn't like this adaptation. They de-wokeified the blue fairy.
Exactly. What do you think Ben Shapiro's top 5 and bottom 5 Disney movies would be?
Um, that's a good question. I would imagine this one's pretty high up there, actually.
You would think, but
But also he's rather unpredictable,
yeah,
as we learned.
his media takes are strange.
Yeah, you get a taste of that in the EFAP anniversary stream, which I don't even, is it still going? I don't know, but they've been going for past 24 hours. There's some good stuff in there. I got to join for a part of that, so go check that out if you haven't seen it. But yeah, people who follow politics closely and regularly see, it's almost an ironclad law of the universe at this point that they just have awful media opinions. Like no matter what side they're on of any political issue, if they follow politics regularly, it ruins their ability to think and talk about storytelling.
Yeah.
It takes over the brain, and then you have
then all of a
people like
sudden,
Ben Shapiro saying that
what
Captain
is
America should be like more like John McCain. It's just so funny. It's
but what does Pinocchio have to say about Zionism?
I don't know if you'd go that far, but yeah. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. You get too wrapped up in like the day-to-day like regular season of politics. It just warps your ability
The
to,
regular season of politics.
you know, like
Yeah,
that's sort
that's
of
funny. That makes sense actually. I only
I
watch
only
for the
really tune
playoffs,
in. Yeah, exactly. I'm only here for
for the
the
Super Bowl.
postseason. Yeah. Anywho, so and one thing, a small detail that I liked here is when she's talking to him about his conscience. The Blue Fairy's talking to Pinocchio about his conscience, and he's like, "What is that? What is a conscience?" And then Jiminy Cricket is so just kind of compelled to help him that he just kind of offers himself up, just starts explaining what a conscience is. You know what I mean? Because it's
Yeah.
almost like his own conscience is like, how will he know?
Oh, yeah, that's the thing about Jiminy that I really like as a character that I think works a little bit like more as a grounding force than maybe that you have in the book is that Jiminy is sort of the audience. He's meant to sort of be the audience stand-in a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
he's there to sort of be the guiding voice, and he immediately realizes what's going on and realizes that somebody's going to need help, so he offers himself up as a helper. You know,
Hmm.
it's a little bit less like the cricket, or it's very much less like the cricket in the book, who just sort of shows up and tells him what to do, and then basically insults him to the point of him getting very angry and throwing a mallet at him and squishing him, killing him immediately. Right? Like
Yeah.
it's
That's almost a bit more like how Jiminy Cricket functions in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. uh, God, that's such a good movie.
it is it is a good movie.
Um,
How does this
actually, like,
movie factor into the shared universe as set forth by Pixar's Wish? I
oh
haven't
God,
seen Wish. I don't
I
know how that
know.
works.
I couldn't believe I haven't seen it, but I could not believe that they tried to at the very end of Wish kind of tie it all into one universe somehow. It's like why would you do that? Like why would you ruin all these good movies? Like as a celebration supposedly of the whatever anniversary of Disney Studios or whatever it was that Wish was supposed to be. They're like, "Oh, and then this character from our shitty movie went on to be the fairy godmother." It's like, "What are you doing? Stop it."
But how will this affect the storyline of Kingdom Hearts, Jamie? How
God,
will they reckon with this in the world where Donald Duck is a powerful sorcerer and
I
Pinocchio is a summon for combat?
he uses his nose like a sword. So Jiminy Cricket's like, "What are conscience? I'll tell you. A conscience is that still small voice that people won't listen to." That's just the trouble with the world today, which is interesting because this is very much a movie that feels in line with, I guess you'd say, older, more traditional values in a lot of ways. But it does feel like even at the time, it was a bit of a reaction to the culture of the moment, like trying to harken back to the way things used to be. There's little moments of that, not too many, not to the point where it gets kind of preachy, but that little like that's the problem with the world today sort of thing. You get that a little bit of that energy from Jiminy Cricket here, which I like.
Yeah.
Like conscience is the still small voice that people don't listen to. It's like, oh, a little cynical, Jiminy. But then, yeah, and then she's like, "Oh, would you like to be Pinocchio's conscience?" And he gets red in the face because he's like, "Oh my God, a pretty
Oh,
lady's
pretty
talking to
lady's
me."
talking to me. Oh, jeez. Oh,
And so
jeez.
he just agrees to it implicitly. He's like, sure, whatever you say, pretty lady." think he just says, uh-huh. And
Yeah,
so he introduces
it's
himself,
yeah.
Jiminy
And
Cricket.
she gives him a nice little wardrobe upgrade. You know, he gets some new
Yeah.
duds. He
And
asks for a badge. You know, an official badge. You know.
it's like, hey, you just got all these nice new clothes. Maybe let's not get too greedy here. And so like, it's like, maybe I can get an official badge for it. And she's like, maybe if you do a good job, essentially. Like he gets this fancy like umbrella cane combo, a top hat, these, wingtip type kind of shoes and all that sort of stuff.
Some new spats. Yeah, some new duds. He's looking fresh. You know.
Yeah.
He hit Rodeo Drive.
And then she disappears. I also like that Jiminy Cricket calls her Milady. That's just kind of funny.
Yeah, that's nice. Nice touch. Yeah, there's a little bit of like this it goes to the to the more Christian symbolism part, right? But he's overcome by the goodness of the fairy, right? As well as just her beauty. You know,
Yeah.
it's not just about that.
Yeah, she's like a perfect embodiment of like a sort of transcendental ideal, and that's what calls him to
yeah, it's a
do
little
what
bit
he
like the
needs to do.
dwarves in Snow White, right? Like
A
it
little bit, yeah.
calls him to a higher level of
Because he's kind of selfish too. He goes on a little arc. That's something I never really appreciated before, is the little arc that Jiminy Cricket goes on.
yeah.
Because he's very out for numero uno. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, but he's definitely more concerned with himself. And there's a funny little moment, like right after he gets these new clothes, and he's got his new role as conscience to Pinocchio. He's looking at himself in the mirror and he's humming. He's like, "Wow, don't I look great?" And then Pinocchio kind of his head comes into the frame. He's like, "Oh right, I almost forgot about you."
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a little like a smaller version of the same sort of arc where he has to learn. Well, he's given this responsibility now to be a mentor and a guide
Yeah, well,
to
and
this.
he does have to learn because he kind of abandons him. Like there are a couple times where he's just like, "Well, fine, go off, go off and do this." When it gets
You
difficult, he
see
kind
what
of
I care. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
When it gets difficult, he sort of abandons Pinocchio for a little while until
Yeah,
eventually, at the end, Pinocchio, like when they're trapped in the whale, he doesn't, he's locked out, but he fights to be able to get back in. He stays at the
yeah.
teeth.
And
So
it's a comedy moment, but like if you really think about it, it's a pretty important moment for his character.
yeah,
He goes all the way and he finds this giant monstrous sea monster, and he's like, "Hey, let me in there!" like
I gotta get
like
in
my
there.
my boy's in there. I gotta go help him. Like, open up. And that it is comical, and it's just a really nice moment at the same time. Good, I like it. Yeah, so it's a sort of smaller version of the same arc, which I think is good. I never really considered in the past that he gets a little character journey as well. And then we get one of the first little songs here is like "Give a Little Whistle," or I think that's what it's called. Anyway, that's the line they keep saying over and over again. It's like when you anytime you need me, just give a little whistle. And there's some fun little stuff that Snow White did a little bit of this as well, just playing around with music and sound, like in Snow White, for example, when she's like harmonizing with herself in the well. Like first
Yeah,
it's an echo and then it's harmonizing. It's just fun little.
he does that in his hat, and then
Yeah,
Pinocchio tries it, and
exactly.
it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it's a really funny comedy beat. Okay, so the Jiminy Cricket whistles into his hat, and then he says, "Give a little whistle," and then he hears the call and response coming with a sort of reverb soaked response coming out of his hat. Pinocchio tries it too, but he can barely whistle, so he whistles into the hat, and then there's the moment where it's supposed to answer the call and just nothing happens.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a funny little moment. I like it.
And
I
they're doing
also,
all of this before Geppetto wakes up, of course.
yes. And then the other thing I noticed, I was kind of struck by, is that Snow White and Pinocchio have the same color palette.
Oh,
It's
that's
kind of
true. Yeah,
interesting.
that is.
The sort of primary color palette, that was an interesting choice because it's basically the exact same colors actually. I didn't need to change much for the stream background colors. Anyway, it's just an interesting
Yeah,
touch.
that is So yeah, so he Geppetto ends up waking up and he's thrilled, that his puppet has come to life and he's going to send him to
Oh, it's
school
even
the very
wait,
next day.
it's even better than that because there's a sort of comedy beat that happens like 2 or 3 times in this movie. So anyway, they're singing "Always let your conscience be your guide," yada yada, and then Pinocchio trips and then sends a whole bunch of paint buckets crashing to the ground and everything. Wakes up Geppetto. Geppetto, of course, is like, "Who's there?" And he says, "Who's there?" And Pinocchio says, "It's me." And then Geppetto goes, "Oh, it's me," and like starts to go back to bed. And then that's a nice little
Yeah.
beat.
Oh, it's me.
That
Oh my God, Figaro, there's somebody in here.
and then that sort of beat happens a couple times with Geppetto. It happens quite a bit later in the movie. Um, but like when he's in the belly of the whale and he's catching the tuna and he catches Pinocchio, but he doesn't realize it right away. And Pinocchio's like, "Father, it's me." He's like, "Not now, Pinocchio. I'm trying to catch these
Yeah.
fish," or whatever he says. It's
Don't
something
bother
along
me
those
now,
lines.
Pinocchio.
Yeah. And the final one, which is less comedic because it's at the sort of emotional climax of the movie, but Pinocchio is dead, presumably on the bed, and then he wakes back up because the blue fairy brings him back to life, and he's like, "Hey, father," and he's like, "Why are you sad?" And he's like, "Because you're dead, Pinocchio."
Yeah.
He's like, "I'm not
Yep.
dead," and it's like it's the sort of same sort of beat, and I think it comes in threes as well, which is always a nice touch. Some good stuff. So then
Yeah.
he's freaked out. He grabs his little pistol and his
Oh
candle,
my
and his
God,
hands are
dude, when
shaking.
Geppetto comes out strapped, he has his pistol underneath. This man sleeps with a gun under his pillow.
Yeah, that's
that was
great.
that was
But
so fucking
he's gotta
crazy.
protect his like woodworking shop from all the ne'er do wells in the village. You know, he's just a
Dude, Italians are notoriously sticky-fingered people. You gotta.
yeah.
You
I
gotta.
love his little pistol that he comes out with. It's pretty good.
I was like, good lord, Geppetto, my boy, and it's loaded too, because he just pops like when he gets scared, he just pulls the trigger and that thing goes off. Like it
Yep.
blows a hole in the fucking roof. It's a blunderbuss too. You could load the kitchen cutlery into that thing. He got like
Yes.
he's got grape shot loaded up in that. He's ready. He's not
Yeah.
playing around. Geppetto. You don't fuck with Geppetto.
I also like his initial reaction to seeing Pinocchio like talking and moving about. He's like, "You can talk," and he's like, "Yeah, I can talk." And Geppetto goes, "No, no, 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 no." He's like, "This is wrong. No, I don't like this." He's like, "I must be dreaming." He pours the water on himself, and he's
Classic. Yeah.
like,
Must be
"Yeah."
dreaming. Yep.
And he tells him that the blue fairy brought him to life, gave him a conscience, and one day he's going to be a real boy. And Geppetto, of course, is overjoyed that his wish came true. And then he's really happy, and then he's introducing him to his cat and his fish and all that sort of stuff, showing him around the shop, doing a little song and dance and celebrating and everything like that, as he would at the miracle of life and all that. And then he gets distracted, and Pinocchio's like, "Oh, look, a candle! Look, fire!" And then his finger lights on fire, and Geppetto's like, "Oh shit! Okay, this isn't all fun and games." Like,
Yeah.
learning very quickly, even in his old age, the sort of responsibilities of parenthood type stuff.
Yeah, and gives you a nice little like hint of exactly what the problem is going to be, right? Is like it's a little different from the story. We're setting it apart because in the story, the original parts anyway, Pinocchio sort of embodies just like all the rascally and sort of negative aspects of young boyhood, right? Like that are generally associated with you know rough housing, that kind of thing. When they bring it up
Yeah,
later on. But in this one, like he's just like he's just trying to have a good time, right? He's just trying to join in on the fun, but he doesn't
yeah,
know any better, so he lights his own finger on fire, right? Like
yeah,
we're going with a more naive sense of youth than a mischievous and devious sense,
yeah,
which I like the way that they do that for like in this one it makes him less of a like less of a asshole, right? Like that's basically what we're
yes.
going for, right? It's like he's less of a little prick.
He's
uh
more of a normal, average child in
yeah.
this than a sort of maladjusted, antisocial kid with some sort of more aggressive, violent tendencies who needs to learn to be better. It's a different story essentially, but Pinocchio is a bit more aimed at just the average kid in some
Yeah, well,
sense.
it's more it's geared a little more towards the second half of the book, right? Is
Yeah,
where he's more, he wants to be, someone that his father is proud of, and that he wants to be, a real boy, which is not really introduced in the first half. It's not introduced until he starts writing the second half of the book. Um,
interesting.
so I also just noticed that the chat reset itself again. So real quick, I'm gonna do some call outs because missing a few. All of my homies hate the whale level in Kingdom Hearts. That is accurate. I don't. You've never played that, I'm pretty sure.
I have
That
not.
whale level fucking blows. That is a that is a bitch. Um, the fairy in the fairy in the Guillermo del Toro one is a biblically accurate angel. Is that true?
It's kind of more in keeping with that. The whole biblically accurate angel thing is a bit of a meme, but uh, she's quite a bit more like a certain kind of angel. I can't remember the official names of them because there's more than one type in some of the biblical stories. But have you seen the Guillermo del Toro
No,
movie,
no, I
right?
have not.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, I didn't know that. I think you'd like it, but not love it. That's my prediction for you. But because I don't want to get into it right now because it's a whole can of worms. But I think there's some changes he makes to the story that kind of make it a little less impactful for me. Kind of changes the message. But overall, it's a visually stunning movie with a lot of really great stuff in it. The Blue Fairy is more of like a chimera, like animal human
Oh,
hybrid
interesting.
thing. A bit more, yeah. It's very Guillermo del Toro-y. you know, it reminds me of Pan's Labyrinth a little bit. The angel, she's got like a bunch of eyes, in a way that like some depictions of angels and some of the visionary accounts in the Bibles are like there's like the wheels with all the eyes on them. That's the sort of meme biblically accurate angel. So, and then there's some angels that are like of human heads, but like the wings of an eagle, and then
Yeah,
the feet of lions
like a
and all that sort of
sphinx
stuff.
and that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, something a lot more along those lines. So it's definitely a bit more kind of awe-inspiring in the classic sense, where it's
Oh,
a little
interesting.
scary as
Okay,
well.
yeah, I just looked it up. That's really cool looking.
It is cool looking. Yeah,
He
that
does a
stuff's
good
pretty
job with that.
effective.
Yeah, he really does.
Yeah, and I think there's actually in Guillermo del Toro's version as well. There's a little bit more of the sort of curmudgeonly old Geppetto than the very nice, friendly Geppetto we get in the
Yeah,
Disney
the one
version.
who's
So
a
there's
toy maker who's just trying to bring some joy into the world. Who's just like happy to be there.
yeah. So yeah, it kind of picks up on some of the notes that this movie doesn't, but also goes in its own direction. Guillermo del Toro movies, almost all of them seem to be about outcasts and outsiders finding their place, and so his Pinocchio takes on that sort of theme more so than this Disney movie does, but still interesting, still very interesting movie. Um,
And then we got a super chat from Kevo. Thank you very much for the $5. Got to keep the super chat on a bit of the cheap side, boyos. Had to buy 2 tape measures and big tape measure. Loves screwing me. Well, we appreciate we appreciate
yeah,
you looking
well,
out for that.
well, yeah, we appreciate it all. Don't feel like you need to give more.
Obviously
If you got
not.
to buy some tape measures, what
Yeah,
you got to do. Tape measures, very useful tool.
yeah.
Highly recommend. um, let's see. Yeah, there's a weird thing he sort of does, as has been mentioned by Jameson in the chat, where he kind of throws in a sort of cartoony depiction of Mussolini into
Oh, okay.
which is
Interesting.
kind of fun, but it's a little like I don't know if preaching to the choir is the right word. It's not like a meaningful, real exploration of fascism or any of those sort of things that were happening in Italy at the time. It's more just to like, oh, let's throw Mussolini
Well,
Mussolini in here and make fun of him.
the book is originally from
Quite a bit before
1800s.
that,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
but
but
his version,
it was done during the reunification of Italy, which was a big deal at the time. It
yeah,
actually, the author, from what I gathered this morning, the author had been intending to go into the seminary and into the priesthood but the reunification of Italy kind of sparked that patriotic fire in him, and so he decided to leave that and to like he started writing, but then he pivoted out of writing adult fiction or pamphlets, political pamphlets, into children's stories because, and I quote, "Adults are too difficult to please." So maybe a little bit of a rude awakening when he tried to write a children's story where Pinocchio was hanged and
Yeah.
everybody rioted and was like, no.
Like, fine, we'll give him a redemption. Or maybe he was really psyched to do it. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I personally, I do think it seems more like he was, trying to get a big contract. Like, oh, I could be set for the next 15 weeks or 15 months, on a writer's salary if you give me this second season, this back half.
Yep. Anyway, continuing on, now Pinocchio is alive, and isn't that lovely? The next day, I actually kind of like this. There's this wide shot of the city, and you can tell they sort of like simplified the animation for this wide shot of all the kids going to school and everything, and all the people in the village doing their village things. But it looks pretty good still. It's an interesting little. I mean, it's also kind of impressive in scope. All these tiny little characters all moving along as the camera sort of pans across this giant wide shot. It's nice. And so then Pinocchio is like, "Oh wow, look at all the other little children going to school. I want to be just like them." And he's off and he's excited. And Geppetto's like, "Oh come on, don't forget your jacket and all that sort of stuff." He gives him his book. He gives him his apple to give to the teacher. All that sort of classic stuff. And then he's off to school. And this little cat being cute, all that sort of fun stuff. And then we meet Honest John and Gideon.
Yes.
Who I quite love as characters in this story. They're so good, but especially Honest John. He's really interesting to me. So they're kind of, like you said, also sort of dressed in a sort of Depression era, like raggedy clothes, hats torn, and patches in all the clothing and everything.
They've got the same vibe of as Jiminy, right? Like they're drifters who go from place to place, just sort of living moment to moment, right? But they're the reverse of Jiminy, where Jiminy is doing it wholesomely, and you can tell that he's sort of like, he's got his heart set on the right things, trying to help people. These two are the reverse, where they're like, they're out to do it for themselves.
They're the swindlers and the con men and all that sort of stuff. Of course, obviously that he's a fox is no accident. Foxes almost always depicted as very clever, conniving creatures. And and I like they walk with canes. They have this air of like that they're high class people,
Yeah.
Like, I quite like that detail. They walk with this little swagger, and they're like, "Oh, look at the little children, the merry laughter of the little innocent children. How nice!" All that stuff. And I love his energy. Like it's just so perfect that he's this kind of like low class, like criminal grifter con man, but he fancies himself like a nobleman essentially. It's great. And I also like that Gideon doesn't talk. It's just kind of a classic dynamic. And then he sees a sign for Stromboli's marionette show, and he's like, "Oh, Stromboli, look who's back in town."
I think he calls him that old gypsy.
Yeah,
which
he does.
Yeah, bring it back.
And they mention a time where they tried to swindle someone by passing off Gideon as a puppet, and they're like reminiscing, like, all the old cons and things they've done in the past. We nearly put one over on that old gypsy that time. They're laughing and all that sort of stuff. And then they run into Pinocchio. And they're like, it's another great one of these moments. It's the same sort of beat that happens with Geppetto, who goes, "Oh, a little wooden boy. How lovely. Oh my God, a wooden boy." Like he does a little double take. Good stuff.
Yeah.
And the animation, like the way, like when he realizes his neck, like kind of shoots up out of his body a little bit. Yeah, it's classic sort of cartoony physics and animation. It's really nice. And then, so he runs into him, and of course, he's like, "Oh, little wooden boy, like that could be very valuable to someone. So, like, maybe we can sell him to Stromboli." And so they go and they catch up to Pinocchio, and Pinocchio, of course, is very naive, and
Yeah, well,
so
and I think
impressionable.
initially Gideon is like, oh yeah, we'll just club him on the head, and yeah, we got a hammer, and we'll club him on the head. We'll take him over there. And
Yeah,
Honest John kind of does the thing where he's like, no, 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 no. Let me do the talking, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And they sort of smooth talk their way into convincing Pinocchio that he doesn't want to be, he doesn't need to go to school. He's going to be an actor.
yeah.
What does an
It's
actor
kind of
need with school anyway?
yeah. There's something kind of nice, inappropriate thematically that like the first because they sort of con him twice essentially, and the first one is like, why go to school, you can be an actor, and it's like, oh, they're corrupting the youth by offering them fame and success as a child actor, like, huh, that's interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
And then they're gonna take him to an island eventually.
yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. There's something going on there. I can't quite put my finger on it. Oh, and he grabs his. Like, there's a lot of great little comedic beats. He grabs his ABC book. He's holding it upside down. And he goes, "Oh, look at that! A man of learning."
A man of letters, a
Yeah, man of
scholar.
letters, a scholar. It's great,
It's
and it's like, oh, you can tell he probably can't read either, which is pretty funny. He's like, "Oh, school. Ah, yes. Then you haven't heard about the easy road to success."
Yeah, so you haven't heard about the easy road to fame and success.
I'm
Oh
speaking,
yeah.
my boy, of the theater. Which is great. And it's great because one of the things that has been set up before that we forgot to mention is that Jiminy Cricket is trying to explain to him basically an entire moral framework in a few seconds, and he kind of struggles with it, which is a funny little moment where he's like, sometimes the right thing seems like the wrong thing at the time, but then of course the wrong thing can seem like the right thing sometimes, but of course, then he gets all tangled up, and he's like, "Do you understand?" And Pinocchio's like, "No, what are you talking about?"
No.
He's like, "Oh, this is actually going to be more difficult than I thought." He's like, "Well, you see, life is full of temptations, and you're going to be tempted, but you got to stay on the right path. Always let your conscience be your guide, all that sort of stuff." And first thing that happens is he's tempted by an easy road to success. He wants to be a real boy. He wants to make his father proud and all that sort of stuff. And the first thing that happens is like, oh, well, you can go to school and work hard and all that sort of stuff. Or you can take the easy route, which is a great little it makes perfect sense, as a little morality tale for children. The second con that comes later is interesting because it's more of like, oh, like, well, why don't you just go somewhere where you can have fun all the time and you never have to worry about anything? That one's the more like Hakuna Matata type deal than this first one. But it's interesting that they sort of change tact later.
Yeah.
And so he's like, oh, well, with that personality, that profile, that physique, you could be super famous. And then there's a funny little thing that I found very relatable because for a long time, I've struggled with how to spell Pinocchio. I always kind of forget. And he says, well, I can see your name in lights 6 feet high. What's your name again? He's like, Pinocchio. Pinocchio, Pin, U. Anyway, it's fun.
Oh god, the chat's going off with the Vosh jokes. And have you heard of OnlyFans, little boy?
Oh, God.
Oh, yuck.
It's the easy path to success and fame, and everyone will love you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can. Quite a few internet personalities maybe who should watch this movie another time. Give it another look.
A wooden puppet isn't a real boy, so there's nothing wrong with it. Oh my God, that you
Yeah,
you would.
he would
That's
do that.
exactly what
He
he said.
absolutely would do that.
Yes. Oh God, what a piece of shit. Anyway, it's like we're wasting precious time. We gotta go. And so they sing a little song, like the actor's life for me, right?
Yeah, hi diddly dee, an actor's life for me. And Jiminy ends
Mm,
up catching up to him because he just overslept, right? And he says that he
yeah,
mentions that where he goes like, "Oh, first day on some conscience that turned out to be first day on the job, oversleeping, late the first
yeah.
day." And then he catches up to him, and he ends up telling him like, "All right, no, see, remember those temptations I was telling you about? That's them." Like, "Oh no,
This is
that's just Mr. Honest John."
Oh, that's a great detail too. I quite love that his name is Honest John. And Pinocchio's like, what do you mean? His name is Honest John.
Yeah.
And it's such a funny thing, but I think always worth remembering how easily that trick works on people, even adults. It's like, well,
Yeah.
how could you be opposed to this group or this person? It's called Good Thing. How could you be opposed to it when they named themselves Good Thing? You're not against Good Thing, are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's just so many. There's so many, endless examples of that. But that's why I always find it funny that his name is Honest John, and Pinocchio's like, "What do you mean? His name is Honest John." He's saying, "Why would he?" He doesn't keep going on it, but it would be funny. He's like, "Why would he be called Honest John if he's not honest?"
Yeah. I
I also like
I
the line
really
where
like
he
it when
says,
he says
"Hi."
like my name, when how he introduces is like my name, or am I? There's one of those like old things like, oh, we'll get that little puppet and whatever to Stromboli, or my name isn't Honest John, right? Which is like,
Good. I also quite like it when he says, "Hi diddly day, an actor's life is gay." That's just a fun line. That's just good stuff right there.
that is facts. He's spitting bars, man. Geppetto is strapped. This guy's putting out the hits. They're
Yeah.
gonna make it out of the hood with this one.
And so he's talking about how great his life's going to be. He's going to be able to go get nice clothes and go to the candy store and all the sort of stuff like that. But eventually they manage to ditch Jiminy Cricket. Jiminy Cricket thinks he's convinced him, and then Pinocchio just goes right back with him because he's just so naive. He has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And then we're basically now we're at Stromboli's.
Stromboli, and we're at Got No Strings, which,
great song.
what a fantastic song.
It's a bop.
Absolutely kills it. And Jiminy sneaks it, or gets into the thing because he's like, "Wow, fine, make a jackass of yourself," setting up some parts later in the movie.
Yeah,
a little bit. This, in the business, we call this foreshadowing.
And so Stromboli, of course, is the sort of Carney Barker type showman, swindler type. Very loud, boisterous personality. He's like, "Welcome to the special show, and now, never before seen, a marionette with no strings. Oh my goodness." And everyone's like, "Wow, what's this?" And then he comes out, and the first thing he does is kind of fall down the steps, which is pretty funny. And everyone laughs at first. And that's when Jiminy's like, "Oh, go ahead, make a fool of yourself. Make a jackass out of yourself. Then maybe you'll listen to your conscience." But then everything starts going well. Actually,
Yeah.
Turns out he's singing his little song, and he's got some spirit, some energy. I quite like I Got No Strings, Hold Me Down. I also like that. I think it achieves a nice balance, this song, between still sounding like a child singing, because children aren't especially good singers yet, but without being so out of tune that it's obnoxious.
Yeah.
I think it like rides a really nice line, which is hard to do, admittedly, because children just aren't very good singers. And so you can do is one of my least favorite things about Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is you can auto tune Pinocchio's voice, so he sings this really perfectly, like in a way that just doesn't feel like a child singing at all, which I think is a bad choice. Or you can do what they do here, where he's got like some exuberance and enthusiasm, even if he's not quite hitting all the notes perfectly, which I think is the much better approach to take.
And who did
It's a good song too. Go ahead.
Who did Pinocchio's voice for?
That's a good question. Let's find out.
Because
I really have no idea who any of the voice actors are in this movie. Let's see.
Dickie Jones.
Mel Blanc is uncredited as only the hiccups for Gideon, the cat who doesn't talk. That's kind of funny.
That is.
Let's see. Geppetto is Christian Rubb. Dickie Jones is Pinocchio. Uncredited, apparently. Did they not credit anyone? Did they not? Oh my god. Okay, on IMDb, all of the voice actors are listed as uncredited. Wait,
they did that with Snow White also. Remember when we were looking into it? She's listed as uncredited as well.
Oh my gosh, you're right. They literally don't credit them. That's so funny.
That is a strange
the credits are
thing.
all in the beginning. Although the only thing that happens at the end is the end. Essentially, it says who the animators are. It says the art direction, character design, music and lyrics, story adaptation, yada yada. Supervising directors, Walt Disney's name, of course. No mention of the voice acting. Wow. Disney, no. It's fun. That's pretty unfortunate, actually.
That's yeah, well, like I wonder what the reasoning behind
Do
that
you
like back in
think
the day would be, right? Like because it's another thing with Snow White too. They didn't credit the woman who was in Snow White with the voice.
do you think because I could imagine that the thinking could be that like, oh, we don't want to like break the illusion for the kiddos out there that like these are real characters by saying, oh, they were acted by this person. Is there any logic there? Like, do you think that's what the thought process was, or did they just not think it was important? The former seems more plausible to me, but I'm not really sure why. It's a bizarre choice because like no kid who's watching this is really reading those opening credits anyway. They're just listening to the nice music that's playing over it before the movie really starts. Like, so I don't know why you wouldn't
Oh,
credit
okay.
them.
So here's why. So the main reason that they wanted to do it, was that they could keep those voices, those specific voices, under lock and key, basically, so that Snow White, Pinocchio, all the classic voices, um, would be basically exclusive to the studio, so that other people like couldn't go and then imitate the voice, or like have hire the same voice actress to go do the same thing that she did in Snow White.
Interesting, but wouldn't they just have like studio contracts like they did back in the day, where like Humphrey Bogart only does movies for Warner Brothers or whatever?
I don't know. I am not.
That seems
Maybe
like an
not
odd.
because Disney wasn't its own studio at this point. Because this is another thing that I noticed about
Well,
this one,
they
right?
were
Is
their
like
own studio,
RKO
but
Picture.
they weren't their own distribution company.
Yeah.
Because it's RKO Radio Pictures who's distributing the film. Um, Either way, that seems like kind of a bad choice, I think, to not give them credit because they're really pretty amazing performances. I would say a lot of them. Voice acting is
Yeah.
quite good. So, especially Jiminy Cricket. So, who was Jiminy Cricket? Let's see. It was Cliff Edwards, who was also. Oh, he was in His Girl Friday. Oh, I wonder who he was in that. That was a pretty good movie.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, His Girl Friday is a pretty fun movie. It's a very like quippy, very fast talking movie. Like I would not be surprised to learn that it's Aaron Sorkin's favorite movie because it has that sort of very rapid fire dialogue. It's interesting. I like it. It's not my favorite movie of the time, but it's good.
He's in a few
Anyway,
Buster Keaton movies also.
okay,
That makes
interesting.
sense.
Anyway, give some love to the voice actors for these movies, Disney. You think they could include them in like the modern sort of versions that are on Disney Plus? Yeah, because
That is strange
they're
because
not there. Yeah,
the
because even
reason
at
the
the end,
reasoning is literally in order to render the voices as the property of Disney, the voices of the
yeah,
character.
that's kind of shitty.
Yeah,
That's a little shitty. Yeah, because even they could do it at the end too, because once it says the end and then it fades out, they have like black screen, white text saying like stuff about the dubs for other languages. But you could just include it there at least. That'd be something. So like Disney Plus still in current year doesn't credit the voice actors for these movies. That's unfortunate.
yeah, that's kind of I don't like that.
Yeah, not a big fan of that, to be honest. Anywho, continuing on. So
Well,
then he's
I
in the.
mean, so Jay's pointing it out here in the early glimpse into the AI future that actually kind of explains a little bit of like why they thought they might be able to get away with shooting a bunch of extras to AI or to like green screen into the back of their movies.
Oh yeah.
That actually, so it hasn't changed much, clearly.
No, all things considered. And I also know that Walt Disney kind of rather famously, infamously, I guess, was kind of in his mind screwed out of the ownership of the cartoon that predated Mickey Mouse. There's like a sort of rabbit type character, very similar to Mickey Mouse broadly. And he did for another company, and then they had exclusive rights to it, and he couldn't do anything with it. And so he was just like, well, not going to let that happen to me again. And so, I think he might have done some of the same things.
Maybe he overcorrected.
Yeah, well, certainly the legacy of his company has continued that spirit, especially with like lobbying to change copyright law. Arguably the biggest sin they've committed, I would argue. And there's a big list of them, but that one's pretty egregious in my book.
That's the one where they wanted to change the copyright law so that people couldn't get their hands on Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, essentially they fought to push it back kind of outrageously far. And I don't appreciate that. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's good for culture or anything like that. Though I would say that there are more weird and backwards copyright laws out there. I happen to know that Italy has a rather strange copyright system because my girlfriend works in the art department on movies. She was working on Red Notice, of all movies, the very forgettable action adventure Netflix film. And that was supposed to be a globe-trotting movie, but then of course COVID happened, so they didn't actually do any globe-trotting in real life. But they did have like certain sets they needed to build at least 3D models of and everything at certain locations in Rome and all that sort of stuff. And I think at one point they're in a museum set, and so the art department had to find paintings to use in the museum to make prints of, and then you paint a layer of coating so it looks like brush strokes on top of it, yada yada, all that fun stuff. But they had a real hard time getting certain paintings, especially big ones, for the museum because a lot of old paintings, especially like Italian Renaissance paintings and all the sort of stuff that would be in these sort of classic museums, is literally owned by the Italian government.
That's good. Well, that's interesting.
Is owned by Italy, the state, which is interesting. A lot of those are not actually in public domain, despite being really old. So that seems like a really bad, dumb system as well. But so at least ours is a little better than that, despite what Disney has done to try and warp it to their needs and interests.
Yeah, a mild improvement on that's a fucked up system to have. Like really, like those things are from like in 1400s.
Yeah, I'm sure the logic is like it's an important part of their national history, and so they should value it and protect it and everything like that. But like also, I feel like it should just be part of the culture that people can remix and reincorporate however they see fit. So I don't think it's good. Don't think it's good. It has real HOA energy, and I'm very anti-HOA. Was this the inspiration for the Little Mermaid losing her voice? Yeah, there you go. That's something.
I suppose it could have been. Yeah, maybe. Second biggest sin was to throw a bunch of lemmings off a cliff when that particular habit of the rodent turned out to be a myth. Yeah, well.
Anyway, moving on with the story. He's in his marionette show, Stromboli's marionette show, and he's dancing around with actual puppets from different ladies from different cultures and stuff. There's French and Russian and Italian and all that sort of fun stuff. And they're like singing a silly song, and he's dancing around. He's kind of confused, but he does a good job, and everyone's clapping and cheering for him. And oh, it's a success. And Jiminy's like, oh, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is going to be a path to success. Maybe he doesn't need me after all.
He's a success. What's an actor need with a conscience anyway?
Great line. Great line.
It really is. Some Dr. Diddler also mentioning, on the other hand, we haven't gotten a ton of cancerous Tolkien adaptations because his grandchildren own Lord of the Rings. And yeah, there we go.
Why is the giant tumor?
That is rings power. That's the thing, is that it's yeah.
I am of the opinion that copyright should end when the artist dies. Kind of period, full stop. I see more bad examples than good examples of the estates of artists just trying to basically make money on the work of their father, their grandfather, whoever it is. there's a really dumb lawsuit that, thank God, went in the right direction as far as I'm concerned, because it would have set a very bad precedent where Marvin Gaye's estate tried to sue Ed Sheeran for copyright infringement over a song that uses, it's not even the same, it's just a very similar chord progression. And anyone who has any knowledge about music and music theory is like, what the fuck? You can't copyright a chord progression. That's game over for pop music. And of all genres, really, if you can copyright a chord progression, that would be a really bad idea. Oh, but who started the lawsuit? Oh, it was the estate of Marvin Gaye.
Of course.
Because they wanted more money. It's just like, no, I don't think you actually should own the right to the music. I mean, Marvin Gaye is a particularly weird case because he was murdered by his dad.
Wait, what?
Oh, you didn't know that?
No.
That is a true fact.
He was murdered by his father?
Yeah. I mean, like, unless I'm having a stroke or something.
Shot and killed on the day before his 45th birthday. Oh my God. No, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's a horrible story. He became involved in a physical altercation with his father, who shot him twice. Yeah.
Holy
it's a terrible
shit.
story. Sorry to bring the whole mood down, but like that's a especially weird one. Like because he died young, it seems maybe a little weird to just have the copyright leave the family immediately, but I feel like that's probably the best system to have, because they made it, not your kids. And so the idea that no one else can reproduce it or remix it and all that sort of stuff, even after they're dead, to not make money from their own work anymore, it just seems like a dumb system, and I don't care for it. Abolish copyright, Donald's Angry says. No.
Not the whole thing. Maybe not the whole thing.
There's an interesting argument, actually. Music's a weird one because musical copyright, there's basically two kinds. There's the copyright to the song itself, the composition, and then there's the mechanical royalties, as they're called, which is the actual recording. And those are two separate things, and they can often be owned by two different people, for example. So I've heard some arguments that, at least in the musical sphere, we should do away with the compositional copyright system, so that like anyone can do a cover, anyone can do a remix, essentially. But if you want to use the actual recording that was done, in a remix, or you want to sample it or whatever, then we should keep that copyright. So that way, people can sell, the recordings they make of their own songs, but also you allow for how, old musical traditions tended to work, where everyone just covered popular songs. Like the entire history of jazz is people doing covers of basically the same, like 30 or 40 songs. So if people were super litigious back then about the compositions themselves, then we'd lose a lot of great music. And I find that argument fairly convincing, that, but of course the problem that opens up is, okay, you write a song and you're just a low level indie artist trying to make it, and then some big pop star swoops in and does a cover that's way more famous than yours ever is, and then, like, I don't know, does that take away money that you would have had? I don't know. It's complicated, but I definitely think copyright law is good to a degree. I think it's kind of an abomination that it extends past the artist's death. Just in principle, I think that's ridiculous. Did you know that CCR's label tried to sue John Fogerty because they thought his solo work sounded too similar to his CCR work, which he also wrote? That's funny. There's some egregious lawsuits that have been filed in this sphere. They drive me mad. Don't care for it.
That's a bizarre one. So back to Pinocchio. He's dancing around, singing the Ultron song.
The Ultron song.
Yeah, you remember that when Age of Ultron? That's how you know when Age of Ultron is like one of the very first ones that Disney had its paws in, because Joss Whedon immediately went and used the Pinocchio music.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't think about that, because I kind of forgot that. I tend to forget that Avengers 1 was Paramount, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Ultron was the first. I think that was the first one of the first big ones that Disney really had its hands, like had it, was involved in, and so yeah, the No Strings on Me turned into the Ultron music.
The Ultron theme, as it is now known by everyone. And so, like we said, Jiminy is like, well, I guess he doesn't need me anymore. Like, what does an actor want with a conscience anyway? And then we're in Geppetto's cottage. It's raining, of course, because it's sad. And Geppetto has this beautiful feast prepared, this banquet for his cat and his goldfish and Pinocchio, who's expecting to come back from school, but he
First day of
hasn't
school.
seen him. And he hasn't seen him, and he's like, "Well, I better go out and look for him again." And he's sad. You feel bad for him. And there's a funny little moment where the cat is told he can't take a bite until Pinocchio returns, and he wants to take a bite, and the goldfish scolds him. More classic Disney cute animals doing cute things.
Of course.
And then we are in not Geppetto,
Stromboli's
little cart, little.
He's counting up the money. He's counting up all the money that Pinocchio's made him, all the gold coins that got tossed on the stage.
Yeah. Oh, I love the way everything he does is with the sword too. He's eating off of it. He's pushing the gold coins around with the sword. It's just it's fun in like a threatening sort of way. It says a lot about him very simply. And it's like, oh, like you're gonna be great, kid. We're gonna make so much money. He's like, oh yeah, and he's like, yeah, this is gonna be great. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go home to my dad now. And it's like, yeah, fucking right, you're going home to your dad. You're my slave now. And he locks him in a cage. It's like, oh, this did not go as planned. Uh-oh. What is our hero going to do now? I think it's really, I like that. It's a really quick and like dark turn that we see like the underbelly so quickly here. It's like, no, you're my property. Like you're gonna sing for me, you're gonna make me a bunch of money, you're not gonna get any money, and you're never going home.
Doesn't he threaten to kill him too? He says like, and if once you're too old, you'll make good firewood, and he throws an axe at a dead marionette, and it's like, oh yeah, no, this movie's too cute and wholesome. Totally ruined
culture.
The vibe and the culture.
Yeah, I quite like that because there's a lot of, he'll be turned into firewood. The first thing that goes wrong once he becomes alive is that his finger catches on fire, and then ultimately he has to like light the fire to save him and his father. There's a lot of that going on. The only thing that maybe could have made that sort of thread ever so slightly stronger is if, for example, in like trying to build the giant fire to get out of the whale at the end of the movie, he had to like throw a bit of himself in it. That would have just been
that would have been really solid. I don't. That doesn't sound like something Disney would have tried to get away with back in the day, though.
But it is kind of like that would complete the point. Otherwise, it's all still there, but it's maybe not as punchy as it needs to be. But there is something about that sort of like self-sacrificial nature, because that's sort of one of his big fears throughout the movie is being used as firewood and burning to death. Like that's often presented as the threat he faces. And ultimately he has to build the fire to escape. It's good stuff. So now he's stuck in the cage and there's lightning and the cart's shaking around and he's miserable. Jiminy Cricket manages.
Let me out of here. Yeah. I love that like old-timey like prisoner thing that he's got going for him. There's an episode of Mad Men where Don writes this ad for, I think it's for like floor wax or something like that, where this kid is trapped in prison, like a prison of kitchen chairs underneath a table, and he's got the very same tone, like let me out of here, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's a very nostalgic kind of vibe, like one of those old-timey like Brady Bunch episodes or something like that. It really I really enjoy the design on this one.
Yeah. J. Jameson says, does the puppet even eat? He just made a feast for himself, right? Well, I don't know if he needs to eat, but I think that does kind of miss the entire point. But later in the movie, he he's like smoking cigars and drinking
smoking
beer.
Cigars and drinking. Also later in the movie when he's taking that huge hit off that fat blunt, That is like the perfect. That is a really good animated depiction of what it feels like to be way too high.
Yeah. Yeah, when he's seeing the 8 ball and it's moving around,
He's
his
like,
face is all green.
whoa, yeah. He's all groggy and everything. Takes.
Pretty good. I mean, like I think very clearly the feast is meant to be a celebration of Pinocchio coming to life, but completing his first day of school. So like I don't think there's any reason to think the feast is just for him. It's also for his animals, and I'm sure Pinocchio, like, because Pinocchio does eat in the movie. He doesn't need to, but he does for like pleasure, I guess.
Yep.
I guess you
Well,
would say.
in the story, he does the book. He eats. He does get hungry and everything. Um, he actually in the book when he ends up getting let down from the tree, and Honest John and Gideon, the fox and the cat, as they're called in the book, come back after him to try to take the money out from under his tongue, and he ends up biting off the cat's paw. So
Oh wow,
he can do all
he's
kinds
got
of
some
shit. Yeah,
chompers.
boy can eat.
So Jiminy Cricket finds him as he's, going past him in the cart, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna help you." And then he tries to like get into the lock and break it apart, and he's like, "Ah, I'm a little rusty." And I like all the sort of echoey, clanging sounds that are happening from
Must
inside
be
the
one of the
lock.
older models.
Yeah, it's fun little jokes, good stuff. They give Jiminy Cricket a lot of funny stuff to say. He's just so earnest, and he really sells it. And he's like, "Well, I tried to help you, but I can't." And so then now they're both sad. Geppetto's sad. Everyone's sad. Like he's like, some conscious I turned out to be, all that sort of stuff. He's crying, and then this is maybe the I don't know how you feel about this, but narratively, it feels like the weakest part of the movie, that they're stuck in this predicament, and then the blue fairy shows up. Well, first of all, I mean, we'll get to the part that I have a problem with, because this first part's all right. She's like, "What's going on? What happened?" And he lies, right? He's too embarrassed to like admit his mistake and admit what he did wrong, and that he failed his father by like not doing what he was supposed to do, all that sort of stuff. And so he lies to save himself. Classic little kid thing. And his nose grows, right?
Yeah.
And I quite like, it's on the nose, no pun intended, but I like the way the blue fairy says it, that like if you keep lying, the lies will grow and grow until it'll be as plain as the nose on your face. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, that's a nice line. I totally forgot about that, but it's a nice way of putting it. I like it. So it grows, and then of course you get the little tiny like buds
Well,
of
what
flowers
I
and
really
branches
like
coming
about
out of
this,
it.
right, about the little buds and flowers, right, is that it's pretty at first, right? It's like, oh,
Yes.
it's growing. There's like it grows, and then there's a little nest with a little bird family and everything in it, right? And
Hmm.
then he tells one more lie afterward. He says, well, and then he chopped me up into firewood. And then it grows
Yeah.
just a little bit further, and the whole, like, it turns very sour, very, like, the leaves fall
Turn
off,
red and fall
turn red
off, and
and
now
fall
it's
off,
a
and the
dead
birds,
tree.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
dead tree. I really like the symbolism. The
Yeah.
visual storytelling right there is fantastic.
Oh, it's really good. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it's, the lie seems like it's working at first, and it seems like, hey, this is great. And then, of course, it doesn't end well. Just to put it mildly, it's good, and I like the sort of like the sort of like decay that comes at the end of it. It's good. And then Jiminy Cricket's like, "Give him another chance for my sake," and she basically says like, "Okay, well, I'll help you out this once, but I can't, like, I'll forgive you this once, but remember, a boy who won't be good might as well just be made of wood," which is a fun little line as well. And then she basically unlocks the cage she's in, says, "Very well, but this is the last time I can help you," and then she disappears. How do you feel about this moment?
I don't mind it. Um, I like I like that she comes down and she's like, well, you get one chance out of trouble, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's basically, giving him an out.
Yeah.
He has the opportunity to turn around and go, and and we know he's gonna make another mistake, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Spider-Man everybody gets one type thing.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. You made this one mistake, and it's understandable. You were literally just born yesterday, so I'll forgive you this once. But from
Yeah,
now on, you're on your own.
I don't mind it.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on it because part of me is like, oh, well, then he just gets out of this. It seems like just from a narrative perspective, it's a little Deus Ex Machina-y, but also it kind of works in that.
It's setting up that he's gonna have to fix his own problems
Yeah,
later,
yeah, exactly.
and
And that's the
I'm
kind of
okay.
yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it doesn't strike me as a huge problem, but it's maybe a little unsatisfying. But then again, we're gonna get to the point where he actually has to, put skin in the game and solve his own problems and be truthful and brave and unselfish and all that stuff going forward. So like, thankfully, this is not the final climax, like how he gets out of the crisis of the movie. It's a little like, okay, well, I'll grant you some more grace this once, but you're gonna have to earn it going forward. And he does, so it doesn't really ruin anything. But it's just it's a little on the fence for me. It's not my favorite part of the movie, we'll say.
Yeah.
And then so he gets out and he goes back home. Well, he doesn't go back home. Oh, actually, the first thing we see is Honest John and Gideon are cavorting at the local tavern, having a good time, laughing about what they did. And we are introduced. Oh God, what's this guy's name? The big fat guy.
The Coachman.
Remember? The Coachman, right? Coachman, which is a great kind of ominous name. They're talking to him.
Jeffrey Epstein. Sorry.
and we learn and we learned that that we hint at it. We don't know the full scope of what he's doing yet, but he kind of enlists these guys to help him bring boys to Pleasure Island, where they
where they'll make tons of videos for Vosh to keep on his computer.
Oh no. Oh no. And it's like you're gonna help round up these kids and bring them to me, and I'll reward you for it. And of course, it's interesting because he's obviously more evil even than Honest John. And Honest John's like, wait, like, aren't you gonna get caught? And it's like,
Honest
no.
John is like worried about helping him at first. He's like, what the fuck?
This is a little dark, dude. and he says like, don't worry, they won't come back as boys. Uh-oh. What are you gonna do?
We're gonna pump them full of hormones and
oh God,
put them in the Olympics.
Oh, stop. Stop it. Stop it. I think it's interesting that he calls them stupid little boys too. He says, the disobedient ones who play hooky and don't go to school. Just interesting. It's very kind of classic morality tale for kids. Like, oh, you don't want to be one of those stupid boys who plays hooky and ends up turning into a jackass. Subtlety is not something this movie has a ton of, but I like it. I think it works. And so then they're talking about their evil plan. Like, no, there's no risk because don't worry. Like, and it's interesting because Honest John is like cowering in fear from him a little bit.
Yeah.
Interesting. He still goes along with him, but he's a bit like afraid of him.
Flannel McManel's also pointing out as well, like his face when he says they don't come back as boys it's very devilish and demonic.
Oh, yes.
Like, it's
of course.
very well done. Yeah.
Yeah, the evil characters are appropriately ominous and scary and devilish. And so Pinocchio, now he has a new lease on life, and he's like, nothing's going to stop me now. I'll make good this time. Like, I'm going to be right on the straight and narrow path. I'm going to go to school and make my dad proud, all that sort of stuff. And Jiminy Cricket's like, yeah, great. Now you're talking. That's the good stuff. Come on, I'll race you home. And they're running around. And then, of course, they immediately run into Honest John and Gideon again. He's like, well, how's the great actor? He's like, I don't want to be an actor. And this is a great little visual gag, too, where Gideon has like a little, like the sort of vaudeville cane hook in Pinocchio's back pocket. And he's kind of like holding him in place. Like Pinocchio still thinks he's running.
Yeah.
And Honest John's running in place. It's great. It's really good. very vaudeville. It's very
Yeah.
slapstick. It's very like I don't know.
I like it a lot. It's got that old time cartoon, that old time
Yes.
cartoony aspect to it.
He says Stromboli was terrible, and he's like, "Oh, he was. Oh my goodness. Like, he locked me in a birdcage. He did. Oh no, that's terrible." And he's doing that like that classic thing where he puts his hands together and he's like, "Oh no, goodness me. I can't believe it. This is you're telling me this for the first time. Oh, you poor boy, you must be a nervous wreck." Oh, and this is an interesting one because the first time he cons him, he's like promising him fame and fortune and like gassing him up. And he's like, "Oh, with all your features, like you'll be great. You'll be perfect on the stage. You'll be a hit. You'll be a sensation." And then this time he's like, "Oh no, you're a nervous wreck. Like, oh no, clearly something is horribly wrong. We need to get you taken care of right away." Kind of the exact opposite. There's a sort of um like abusive model happening here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like kind of ping ponging back and forth between both extremes. I think it's good. It says you're a nervous wreck, and then he kind of like we must diagnose you, and he pulls out these little spectacles and he just starts
I love
talking
that.
in like psychology gibberish. Pretty great.
Yeah, he's reading off psych TikToks.
Yes, exactly. So
he's diagnosing him with BetterHelp.
That's funny. And so he's like, and now he's confusing him like, "Oh no, something's actually horribly wrong with you. We need to get this taken care of." And then there's another little hint at the fact that he's actually illiterate because he writes a bunch of stuff on a paper and then we get a close up of it and it's just a bunch of scribbles.
Yeah.
Pretty good. And he's like, "Oh, but I have to go." And he's like, "No, of course you can't go. Like you need to and then like basically the treatment that he offers him for his nervous wreck is like, "Oh, you need to relax. You need to go on this vacation and you need to go there and have a good time and relax and forget all your worries and that'll fix you right up. And here's a ticket and it's an ace of spades," which I quite like because there's a lot of the sort of carnival gambling sort of ethos of the island itself. And so of course the ticket is the ace of spades. That's a nice little fun touch. And then they sing then they sing "Hi Diddly Dee," all that sort of fun stuff, and he takes them to Pleasure Island. And Jimmy's like, "Jesus Christ, what this kid?" And then we meet Lampwick, which is an interesting little character who's kind of the bad influence on him. Lampwick is probably a bit more what I imagine Pinocchio is like in the original to some degree. He's slightly older. He's a bit more of like a hooligan in some sense.
And so in the original one, he's they're basically just like best buds. They're basically just the same. It's interesting how that works out. He ends up, one of the other things in the original story is that he ends up watching Lampwick as a donkey die from being overworked.
Oh wow.
So that is another thing that like he gives a little bit of himself in order to sort of like help this person, who is a former friend of his, who ends up like giving him some comfort at the end of his life, but seeing seeing him die, which is really
that'll scare you straight.
I
thought I didn't quite know precisely what to make of it, but that his character's name is Lampwick in the first place is a really interesting choice. Obviously that comes from the original story, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting in this movie at least. I don't know quite what to make of what it means, but there is something interesting about the fire aspect of it because that's a motif that keeps coming up, and that he's like I don't know. It made me think of because they sort of go to this island that's all about hedonism and destruction and things that like don't last and like burn bright but then fade away quickly. I don't know. There was something of that in it. Maybe I'm just reading into it too much, but it's an odd choice for a name.
Yeah, no, I think
Lampwick.
that does make some sense, right? Like
Yeah, there's
that's
something to it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's an interesting character name. Like, hey, the name's Lampwick. Like, what? Speaking of names, it's a moment that I had forgotten about earlier in the movie when Geppetto's like, "Oh, I know what I'll name him. I'll name him Pinocchio," and then he turns to Figaro the cat and I can't
Cleo the fish.
Cleo the fish, and he's like, "What do you think of Pinocchio as a name?" And they both shake their head no, and I was like, what's that supposed to indicate? I didn't quite understand what they were going
That I,
for
you
there.
know, honestly, that I don't know. I'm
I still don't know what to make of that. They're like, no, that's a dumb name, and he's like, whatever, I'm going with it anyway. Like, oh, okay. Anyway, moving on. They're heading to Pleasure Isle, and he says you can tear the. They're being told you can tear the joint apart, and nobody says a word, and all that sort of stuff. All the sort of like hedonistic, pleasure-seeking, destructive sort of energy of especially male adolescence with no responsibilities. Doesn't that sound great? And so we see that manifest in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of carnival-esque rides and games to be played. People are like kids are drinking even though they're too young. They're smoking cigars because they think it's fun and cool. There's my favorite part of this is the model home that's just there to be destroyed.
Yeah, to be completely wrecked.
Yeah, that's a really nice touch. It's probably my favorite part of it. Just that sort of destructive youthful energy with like no sense of building things or protecting things or any of the more noble ways of channeling those sort of instincts. It's all fun and games. It's all no responsibilities, no one to tell you what your bedtime is, all that sort of classic stuff. Um, and it's the carnival is a very nice obvious image of all this sort of stuff where it's just fun and spinning around in colors and lights and a giant party. And then, of course, there's a dark underbelly to it, as there is with all this sort of thing. He's like, oh, yeah, speaking of him eating, like Pinocchio's eating, there's a scene where he has a pie in one hand and an ice cream cone in the other, like an entire pie, not just a slice of pie, So
Yeah.
he's clearly eating and he's enjoying himself doing so. There's another place they go where they pass where Lampwick is like, oh, there's what they call it. What do they call it? It's pretty funny. There's like a room where you're just meant to fight.
Oh, it's the rough
The rough
house.
house. The
Yeah,
rough
that's
house,
pretty clever.
exactly.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that one. Yeah, the rough.
Like, welcome to the rough house. It's the roughest, toughest joint you ever seen.
The shadows and the silhouettes are
Yes.
like of the kids just beating each other up and they're, oh yeah, like yeah,
And he
it's
says, come in and pick a fight, boys. And Lampwick's like, oh boy, a scrap. Like that sounds fun. Come on, let's go in and poke somebody in the nose. And Pinocchio's like, why? He says, just for the fun of it.
okay. Yeah.
It's good. And then there's Tobacco Row where a bunch of like cigar store Indian robot statue things are passing out cigars to everyone. Of course, Jiminy Cricket's caught in all the commotion trying to find him, and it's very overwhelming. He's almost getting stepped on, all that sort of fun stuff. I love there's a sign that says model home open for destruction. So good. And it's like this very nice sort of estate manor type thing. And there's a whole bunch of kids just like dragging a piano out of it and throwing it down the stairs, breaking pots and pans and stuff like that, setting fire to things, having a grand old time, destroying beautiful things. Oh, I quite like that there's an image of the Mona Lisa with just like a crude like stick figure drawn on it. That's fun. It reminds me of Glass Onion. No particular reason. And then Lampwick like throws a brick through a stained glass window, which I also thought was a nice touch, just kind of showing the sort of lack of, care for anything beautiful or
Yeah.
anything of that sort. And there's something really ugly about it in a good way. Oh, and speaking of animation and design, one of my favorite parts about this whole movie in terms of design. So, the what's his name? The carriage guy. What's his name?
The Coachman.
The Coachman. Thank you. His minions with the like yellow eyes and the black hoods. They're like executioners. kind of like they're really terrifying. They're basically demons for all intents and purposes, but I really like their design. They're very ominous and creepy. And
Yeah.
so then he closes the gates so no one can leave, which is not a good sign, obviously. It's a carnival you're not allowed to leave from. That sounds nightmarish. Now he says, now get below and get them crates ready. And we don't know quite what the dark underbelly is going to be here yet, but obviously all the signs are letting us know. And then we fast forward and it's late at night and everyone's gone. And Lampwick and Pinocchio are in a pool hall just hanging out. The party's kind of wound down, and Pinocchio's like, "Where is everyone?" And then Lamp was like, "I'm sure they hear someone. You're having fun. Why does it matter?" Jiminy comments that this place is like a graveyard. Everyone seems to be gone. Why is everyone gone? All that sort of stuff. And then, of course, like they're smoking cigars and drinking beer and all that sort of stuff.
Playing
He's
pool.
like, playing pool, and he's like, "Hey, you smoke like my grandmother. This is how you really smoke."
Yeah.
And he he smokes, takes a big giant drag of it. His face turns purple and then green, and then he's like seeing stars. I really like that one POV shot of the 8-ball wiggling around like he's too high. It's fun.
I agree. I like this whole sequence a lot. You know, the hedonist at the end when Jiminy finally gets there and then is, you know, kind of picked on by Lampwick. You know, a conscience. What do you want with one of them?
Yeah, he's offended by it almost.
Yeah.
So you mean to tell me you take orders from a grasshopper? He's like, "No, not me." Sort of thing. And then Jiminy Cricket like threatens to fight him, which is fun.
Yeah.
And I quite like when he's like, "I'll knock his block out," and then Pinocchio's holding him by like the seat of his pants or whatever, and he says, "Oh, don't hurt him, Jiminy. He's my best friend." He's so naive, he actually thinks he's gonna hurt Lampwick. It's pretty funny. And then speaking of Jiminy Cricket's little arc, you know, when things get difficult, he gets kind of offended at not being considered his best friend. And he's like, "Well, that settles it. You're on your own."
Yeah.
Of course, he'll have to redeem himself later as well. But I thought that was a nice touch. That he's like, "Oh, well, then if you don't need me, fine, I'll go."
Yeah. He does that a couple times too, like with the acting thing. But then like it's interesting. It's fun when he goes back, you know, and is like, oh, maybe you know he doesn't need me anymore. He's going to be a success, and it's like, well, I would like to wish him well. Yeah, why not? And then he goes and you know does it. So it's like his better nature wins over each of these times, which is it's something, you know, something nice that he loses his patience frequently, but he still comes back because he feels like he has a job to do. You know, he's got a duty to take care of.
He's a very relatable character. I like him. And so now we get to what is probably my favorite sequence in the whole movie. Jiminy leaves, he storms out, and he's trying to figure out how to get off this island because he's fed up with Pinocchio. And he stumbles down into the basement, the cellar, wherever this is happening, where the boys are being transformed into donkeys and then sold off to salt mines and the carnival and all sorts of slavery places that you don't want to end up. And so they're being turned into donkeys, and then he's like throwing the donkeys into the crates and all that stuff. And then there's one, I believe his name was Alexander, and he says, "What might your name be?" And he can still talk, and the way he pleads with him, he's like, "I want to see my mother. I want to go home." It's heartbreaking.
It is.
Oh God, his voice.
We talked about the silhouette with Lampwick turning into the donkey already? Like that,
no, we haven't.
That is
because this is the reveal of what the plan is, and then we're gonna cut back to the transformation scene.
Yeah.
But yes, we're almost there. But when Alexander's pleading and he's like, "Take him back, he can still talk," and he throws him into a pen with the others, and they're all screaming and they're like, "Please, please, I don't want to be a donkey." He says, "Quiet," and he like cracks the whip. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you've had your fun. Now pay for it.
Yeah, which is great because there's like the explicit lie earlier that you don't have to pay for any of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course that doesn't last because it never does. And then Jiminy Cricket has this moment where he kind of turns directly into the camera and he's like, "Oh shit, Pinocchio!" Basically, he turns around, he runs out, and now we're getting the scene And Lampwick's like, to hear that beetle talk, he thinks something was going to happen to us, and then immediately the ears shut
Yeah.
out of his
Oh
head.
my God. I love this part too because Pinocchio is still holding on to the beer and the cigar while this is happening. And so like it happens once and he like looks at the cigar. He does that thing where he like looks at the cigar and then puts it down and makes like
Yes.
is like, huh. And then he sees it happen again with the tail and he looks at the beer and he puts that down and like pushes it away. He's like, oh
Yeah.
boy. I
It's
it's
great.
such
It's
a
like
great little gag. I love
it
that,
is.
like that visual. That happens a lot too. Like in the old James Bond movies, there's this one extra who's in almost all of them, where like some crazy stunt will happen. Like James Bond will jump over him while he's sitting at a table. And he'll jump over him on a pair of skis, and then like a bunch of other people will jump over him at the same and like go off chasing him. And
Yeah.
every time he like makes this like like this look at the drink and shakes his head like, oh, what'd you put in this thing? Like, and it
Yeah,
gets me every time, man.
it has
It's
that
really
energy
fucking
for
funny.
sure. Yeah, so he puts the beer down, he puts the cigar down, and he sees that Lamprick is turning into a jackass, literally. And then he's like, "Oh no, you're turning into a jackass." And he kind of laughs at first, and then he brays like a donkey himself, and it's
Yeah,
like, "Uh-oh, this isn't so funny anymore. It's happening to me." And then as it's happening to Lampwick, he's pleading with him. He's like, "You got to help me, be a pal." And then he like goes, he's like clawing at his chest with his hands, and then they turn into the hooves. And I'm pretty sure it's right after that we cut to the silhouette on the wall where he does the final transformation into the
yeah,
donkey. He's like, "Call somebody, call anyone." And the horrified look on Pinocchio's face is great. And he's yelling mama, and that turns into the braying of the donkey. It's pretty it's pretty scary stuff for a kid.
yeah,
You know, like that's pretty horrifying. And I think it's a really nice touch for the last thing he says before he like finally disappears. Um, is that he's calling for his mom. Like that's oof. That's harsh stuff, man.
it really
And
is. Again,
especially I can't stand that the wisecrack guy was like trying to act like this movie was just all sort of like superficial and almost cynical, manipulative wholesomeness and cuteness just designed to make money. It's like this is pretty horrifying stuff. Like Lampwick doesn't come back, you know. Well, this is the end of Lampwick. He's a donkey now. It's like, you know what I mean? This is not easy stuff for kids to handle. I mean, I remember being pretty horrified at the scene when I was a kid. It clearly stuck with me. Like when this sequence started, when I was watching it earlier, it brought all these memories back. It's like, man, some intense stuff. And it does play out almost exactly like a horror scene. It's very effective. The way it's cut, the way they use the music, the way the silhouette shot is just incredible.
yeah, it's
And
fantastic. I
then
mean, it's fantastic, man. This is really where the movie kind of like really where the movie shines, I think.
yes,
At its like,
when the consequences really start showing
yeah.
up.
And the way that like, and this is where the movie shines in like in its changes from the book, right? Is that like
Yeah,
Pinocchio realizes what's happening and takes action to stop it, you know? He realizes this isn't what he wants to be, and he you know, him and Jiminy work on their way to get out, you know? They dive into the water, they run away, they
yeah.
dive into the water. Um I
Well,
like
there's
this
another
part a
like
lot.
right before that. Yeah, we'll get right back to that, but there's just a couple other little details I think are worth pointing out. So, not Jiminy, sorry, Lampwick is a full donkey now, and then the ears sprout out of Pinocchio, and Jiminy's running. He's like, "God, I hope I'm not too late," and the clock is ticking, and then the tail comes out, and then Jiminy comes and he helps him, and he's like, "Pinocchio, the kids, the boys, they're all donkeys," and he's like, "Oh my God, you're a donkey." And he's like, "Come on, quick, before you get any worse." And so it's interesting because uh, everything he did to become the donkey, he already did. He kind of stopped doing it, but the process is still going until he makes the decision to leave.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just make the decision to leave; he has to like throw himself into the ocean, which is like I think you were mentioning the symbolism of that is really interesting. He has to
Yes.
make a sort of leap of faith into God only knows what, could be death even, but he has to do that because, it's the only way out essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and the symbolic the fact that he's given the agency, right, to recognize that he's gone down a path he doesn't want to be going down, and to make the decision to get out, right, to make the tough decision to leave, but to get himself out of that situation. That's something
Mhm.
that that's a change that does not happen in the book, right? He
Interesting.
ends up becoming a donkey in the book, and the only way that he ends up getting out of it is he lives through the hardships of being one until he's killed rather violently and devoured and then reborn again, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what happens in the book version. And I just like I like this one. I feel like this one is more concise storytelling wise, and it gives him more of the like it allows more for the opportunity that the character can that the character can make the decision. That, like, it's not
Yeah.
lost, right? Like hope is not
Yes.
lost. That's
Because I mean, in terms of the message, broadly speaking, the way you framed the other one, it's almost like, well, you're gonna have to suffer for a while, but eventually, like, you might survive and have the
yeah,
opportunity to like be reborn. But this is a bit more active in terms of what you can do. Like, it's sort of like, well, it's not too late to take the leap of faith into God. God only knows, it reminds me of a little bit in a very very broad sense, like the whole idea of like the Exodus story is that, like, well, they leave Egypt and what do? They go to the desert. And it's like, well, the desert might be awful but it's better, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, and that, like, the sort of like leaping into the ocean because it's the only way out, and it's like, well, you could die but it's the, like, you still got to do it, come what may, sort of thing. And it, like you said, it is a bit more active. It's a bit more like a step he can take to try and turn things around instead of just suffering a while until he's been through enough suffering, you know?
yeah, exactly.
And then probably from a narrative perspective, the funniest part of the movie happens. It's such an odd choice. I kind of laugh at it every time it happens. So they go back and they find the cottage, or the house where Geppetto lives, is empty. There's cobwebs there. God only knows how long they've been gone. There's no cat. There's no fish. There's no Geppetto. He's gone, and they're very sad about it because they don't know where he went. The place is in darkness, and like I said, it's full of cobwebs and everything. Everyone's gone and they're not sure what to do. And then the blue fairy, but not exactly the blue fairy, a blue dove-like creature flies down from the star carrying a scroll in its beak and drops it at their feet. I think it's a really interesting choice that it wasn't just the blue fairy again, but
Yeah,
it's like an embodiment of her, or like an envoy of her, so to speak, that comes down, one that can't speak to them, but like drops a, it's just such a strange, because what the message says is really funny to me. So like the dove kind of drops on the ground. It has a sort of glow around it. And Jiminy Cricket's like, "Oh my God, it's a message." And he says, "What does it say?" "It's about your father. Where is he?" Why, it says here that he went looking for you and was swallowed by a whale." "Swallowed by a whale?" He says, "Yeah, uh-huh." And a whale? And then he reacts
yeah,
to the fact that, like, he just read it and was just like relaying the information to him, but he didn't register in his mind at all, which is kind of a funny beat. He says, a whale named Monstro." I want to talk about that in a minute. But he's alive. Alive where? Apparently in the belly of the whale at the bottom of the sea, which is really interesting. Because then
hmm
immediately Pinocchio is like, well, we have to go get him, which is a great
phrasing
moment.
designed specifically to make Jordan Peterson cream his pants. Yes.
Well, it's very, like I said, this isn't a movie that's very subtle, but it all works. It's all
Yes.
very, that is what it would be. You know what I mean? First of all, that it's a whale, but not just any whale. It's a whale named Monster. Essentially, it's a sea
Yes.
monster. It's a sea serpent. It's the Leviathan. It's all of that, right? It's this chaotic uh, creature from the depths, right? And you have to descend into it to go rescue your father and all that sort of stuff that we'll get to. But it's just so funny to me that a dove drops a note, and the note is like, he went looking for you, then he got swallowed by a whale. He's still alive inside the whale. You know what I mean? It's just like, I don't know. It does feel a little bit like the writer is just like, oh God, well, how does he find out that he's in the bottom of a whale?
Yeah,
Hmm. Like
it's
they,
kind of wild because I think in the original story, what happens is he finds out that because he's been gone for a while, and he finds out that Geppetto's looking for him, so he's building a boat to sail to America. And then he watches Geppetto. He thinks he watches Geppetto drown,
mm,
and then eventually, several chapters later, when he ends up getting swallowed by the shark, he finds his father in the belly of the shark. It's a shark, not a whale, in the
yeah.
story, and it doesn't have a name, does it? But yeah, I think the sea serpent imagery. Here, yeah, and of course he went looking for you, and he got swallowed by whales. Like he went looking for you, like on a boat.
Yeah.
Like where did he think you? Where did
Well,
he
it's
think you
interesting.
went?
Actually, what's interesting about that to me is that it does kind of imply that he heard
He
like,
might have gone to Pleasure Island. Yeah.
yes, that he might have gone there, that several children have gone missing, and that there's a rumor they went there, kind of thing. So none of that's explicit, but that all kind of follows enough for me. But it's just the funniest part to me, as Jay Jameson has mentioned in the chat, that the fairy's writing this letter, like, okay, how do I explain this?
Yeah.
The funniest thought for me is the writer going, okay, well, how does he find out that he's in the bottom of the whale? But not just that he's in the bottom belly of a whale, but he's alive down there. Fuck. Well, maybe the fairy can just write him a note. just, just write him a letter and say explicitly that and nothing else. It's just funny. Because it does really feel like I don't know how to connect this exactly to where I want to end up. So fuck it. She just writes him a letter, sends it on a dove. Um, let's see. I wish I was early to this discussion. One of the best Disney movies, hardcore as fuck. I really do think it is one of the best Disney movies. I agree with you.
Yeah, me too.
There, man, at the heights, there's some really good ones. So determining what the best would be is going to be difficult, but I think it's up there for sure. Definitely one of my favorites. Let's see. It's kind of fascinating to have this example of filial piety when I was just thinking about that for the War of the Rohirrim thing.
Oh, the War of the Rohirrim thing. Interesting. Yeah, I just
What
found
is
out
that?
about that recently. It's an anime based on Lord of the Rings. Um,
Oh, okay. I saw that. I didn't watch the
I'm
trailer,
not
but I
sure what
saw the
filial piety would have to do necessarily with that one, but I'm sure that there's some. I'm sure that there's some connection between like duty to your father, or to your
Mhm.
parents, the way that it sort of was in the original, with
Yeah.
Eowyn and all that. But
What's interesting, because I mean, a big part of a big part of Pinocchio's entire motivation is to become a real boy, mostly for the sake of his father, right? It's, I mean, from the very beginning, he was literally just born seconds ago. He doesn't really know what it means to be a real boy. He doesn't really have any real concept of that, but he does know that his father wished for it, and so that he wants to make his father proud and do that. And then he's led astray by all these other things, but then ultimately what it returns to is fulfilling the wish of his father to be, the best child he can be. So there's a lot of sort of respect and duty to the father in this. And then, of course, symbolically, as Jordan Peterson is very fond of pointing out, there's something of like rescuing your father from the belly of the whale is a trope or a symbolic pattern that appears in a lot of myths from around the world, especially a lot of creation myths.
mhm.
The idea that like civilization is formed out of like a giant dead serpent and stuff like that. That there's something of like what you're doing is like your culture, your tradition, or your values or whatever is always kind of dying constantly, and it's your job to sort of revivify it and bring it back to life and carry it forward. And so there's something symbolically of that as well. And I think there's definitely a lot of truth to that.
Agreed. Yeah.
And so he hears from from the letter that his dad is alive. He went looking for him, which is an extra bit of a gut punch that he is in the belly of a whale and he might die there because he was going after you. And so he's like, well, I got to go help him immediately. And Jiminy Cricket's like, wait, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? Like, he's like, I'm going to go find him. And I really like that because in terms of the three things he has to be brave, he has to tell the truth, he has to be selfless, right? And so, boom, there's bravery right there. He's just like, I don't care what it takes. I don't care that I have to go face down this giant monster. I got to go save my dad. So, boom, he's got one of the three down. And Jimmy Cricket's like, Pinocchio, are you crazy? Like, do you realize he's in a whale? And it's like, it's not just any ordinary whale, too, which I think is a nice touch because it could have just been a whale, but it seems to be the embodiment of the monster as such. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's literally named Monster.
That's his actual name. That's his name.
Yes. And I also like that when he's tying the rock around himself to like weigh himself down because he's a wooden boy and he floats. So he can go to the bottom of the ocean. He ties his donkey tail around this rock. And while Jiminy Cricket's telling him he shouldn't do it, he like helps him tie the knot. It's just a funny little comedic beat. So, and besides, it's dangerous. You know, he says, and he says, bye, Jiminy. He's like, if you're not going to come with me, he's like, I may be live bait down there, but I'm with you. And so we get a little bit of that same sort of arc for Jiminy. It's a nice moment. I also really like the shot when they jump into the ocean. They plunge down into the depths. Yeah. It's good stuff.
I really like the part where like I said, it had been a while since I watched this, like since I was a kid, but I had forgotten the part because I was sitting there like, oh, how does he get into the belly of the whale again? And so I really like this part where he's underwater and they have to walk. They have to basically just walk around and ask until they find Monstro.
Yeah. Everyone is scared of him. As soon as they mention the name Monstro, they all like flee in fear. Yeah. But then there's a nice little touch when they're like, all right, well, then they kind of leave the sort of pretty coral reef area, the garden sort of part of underwater. And then they kind of go out into the more barren, the sort of the desert section, if you will. And then all the fish that were like too scared at even the mention of Monstro's name, they kind of come back out from wherever they've been hiding to like watch him go. You know what I mean? Because they're kind of like, oh my god, is he really going after Monstro? It's just a nice little touch.
Yeah,
I like it. And they're walking. I mean, this is actually a kind of a long sequence because we're doing a little bit of silly, cute animal stuff. I think to sort of like. For the kiddos, you know, they've been through a lot recently with the whole like transforming into a donkey thing, and like it's almost like a little bit of levity just to
a nice breather. You know, now
it's gonna get really intense here.
Yes, it is.
God, the music and the way they animate Monstro is just incredible. It's horrifying and it's stressful, and so we get a little break with some little seahorses like. Jiminy's riding a seahorse and it's bucking him like a rodeo horse. That stuff's all fun. And then they finally get to Monstro's, this big like heap just laying on the bottom of the ocean, which is funny. I like that. And of course we go inside and there's a whole giant ship inside there. And we're not sure how long they've been down here, but Geppetto and Figaro and Cleo are all down here, and they're like, well, we don't have any fish to eat anymore. We're probably going to starve to death. Never thought we'd end up like this, Figaro. Things are looking bleak. And then...
he hasn't been cleaning his room down there, you know? It's kind of a mess. Chaos has not been made into order.
He's got to clean his room, bucko. And so Monstro sees some tuna swimming about and he wakes up and he's like, oh, time to eat some tuna. And it's an interesting thing. It's kind of like a little bit of like hope and life for Geppetto, who is alive inside this whale who just doesn't have anything to eat. But now that Monstro is eating the fish again, he's like, oh, I could live, you know, I could live another day down here. And so he's excited. Pinocchio and Jiminy are still like in like, oh god, this is horrifying mode, but he's kind of, there's something of like a resignation of his current state. Like when Pinocchio does go in in a few minutes when they have the reunification. He's like, no, there's no way out of here. But as long as there's fish, we can kind of survive here. Essentially, it's like he's in a bad state, but he's kind of resigned himself to it to a degree. He's kind of given up hope, essentially, that he'll ever get out of here. And then Pinocchio has to be the one who has the idea to light the fire, which is nice. It's a nice touch. But the lighting a fire is the way to like rejuvenate hope and everything. Obviously, that shows up in a lot of things, not least of which being the Lord of the Rings. A lot of good stuff. But so anyway, he's down here and he's catching the tuna. He's actually kind of excited about it. And Pinocchio sees Monstro and he's swimming away from him. And eventually he gets swallowed into Monstro. It's an interesting thing because he's trying not to get swallowed by him. He's kind of two minds about it because he knows he needs to go rescue his dad. But then also, this is the most terrifying thing he's ever seen in his life. So, and then he eventually gets swallowed by Monstro. Jiminy does not, and he's stuck on the outside. And I quite like when Jiminy's like, "Hey, let me in there!" Like, "Hey, Blubbermouth, open up! I gotta get in there." And he's like knocking on his teeth like it's the door. And so Geppetto catches Pinocchio with his fishing rod, and then they have that beat that I mentioned earlier, where he's like, "Not now, Pinocchio."
Yeah. Don't bother me now, Pinocchio.
Yes.
Pinocchio.
It's good. And then they have their reunion, and then there's another little comedic beat where he tries to hug him, but he grabs a fish instead. Silly stuff. Good fun. We like it. Anyway, they have their nice reunion. Everyone's
I really love
happy.
the moment too, where all the tuna are surging into his mouth as well. Like the animation on that is fucking phenomenal. Dude.
Oh, it's stunning.
It is gorgeous. Watching at the end half of this movie is a real visual treat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, truly stunning stuff, especially like the waves crashing and like especially when the whale is like he like swerves to turn around and it sends this giant wave. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like the water animation, the water physics, if you will. That stuff is incredible. And the movement is all really good too. Like when the whale comes up and he gets the tuna and Pinocchio and then he like lands on the water, there's all the seagulls and the water splashing around. It's just stunning. Really good. So they have their reunion and they're happy to see each other, of course. And then Geppetto learns that he's got the donkey ears. And he's like, "What happened? What happened to you?" And Pinocchio, he doesn't lie this time, but he's not like he's more ashamed of himself and he doesn't want to say. And there's this nice little moment where Geppetto's like, "Well, never mind, it's all over now," kind of thing. Like, don't worry about it. It's just a really nice kind of wholesome moment that I quite like. I really like Geppetto as a character in this movie. And so he's like, "We've tried every way. I even built a raft. There's no way out of here." And then Pinocchio, of course, has the idea to light the fire
in order to make him sneeze. Now, this is another thing that I really like that changed from the book to the movie. In the book version, the shark has asthma.
Oh, that's gay.
Yeah, and it's done in a way that like one of my least favorite things that authors do in general. Like it just especially it happens more in children's books than it does in adult books, obviously, and you'll know why when I say it. But he describes the shark, who he's talked about several chapters before, and he says something like, "And I forgot to tell you all that he had a very bad case of asthma."
Oh God. Oh God. Yeah,
and like that really pisses me off when that happens. So the only reason that they escape is because the shark has asthma, and I think Pinocchio does like help set a fire. Like they do have a thing with the fire where it's like, oh, it'll help make him cough or whatever, but it's a little bit different because no, I don't even think he does. I don't think he does that. I think what happens is the shark just has an asthma attack, and that's how they get out, which is really lame. Really lame.
It's really lame.
The fact that he's not taking charge and doing again, I do like the idea that you proposed that would make it a little stronger, is that he would have to give up like a leg or something like that to the fire in order to really jumpstart it. But the fact that he isn't solving the problem, it happens that he it happens that the shark can't breathe.
I'm not a big fan of stories, and some cultures tend to have a more of a preponderance of these kind of stories where like characters are just blown around by fate. Like I never find that as compelling as stories about characters who make active decisions and then they're rewarded and punished for those decisions and all that sort of stuff where like things happen as a consequence of their actions. Because there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of like old Greek romances and myths and stuff like that where things just keep happening to people. And I just don't find that nearly as compelling. Like how do they get out of this predicament? Well, the shark just has asthma and like coughs them up. It's like, oh, they didn't do anything to earn it or to cause it. They didn't do it. They didn't overcome any faults or things
There
that
was
they
no
needed to improve
ingenuity, and
about themselves.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing about it too is like it's fire that does it, right?
Yes.
That's a very symbolically powerful thing, that the mastery of fire is something that sets that helps them free themselves from the literal abyss, you know.
Yeah. Oh, there's
um
so much to it. There's like the return of fire is like a return of hope and rejuvenation and all that sort of stuff. There's the fact that it's represented death for him throughout the story for so long. As
yeah,
Jordan Peterson is fond of saying, stuff like, when you're really trying to improve and better yourself, one of the things you realize is that a lot of you is dead wood that needs to be burned off, and that's kind of a harsh thing to realize, but it's true. And it can be painful, but it's important and all that sort of fun stuff. And so all of that symbolism is there too. It all kind of comes together in a really sort of effective blend where it matches his character's fears and motivations. It fits symbolically with his journey and a sort of broader sort of archetype of human experience in general. He has agency, so you're more invested in whether he's rewarded for the choices he makes and all that sort of fun stuff.
and like what a straw, like his goal is to become a real boy, right? And to
Yeah.
like become, and to transition from being literally like, a wooden man, a straw man, right, into a
And the
human,
puppet
a
specifically.
puppet into a human. And so what better way than to have him have the ingenuity to use fire to his
Yeah.
advantage? What
Yeah.
better way to do than to do that? It's a really strong, moment. And I just like
And also, just to add another thing to it, is that like the puppet angle specifically is that he is sort of being blown around by the winds of fate throughout the movie. Like people are manipulating him and he's just falling for it because he doesn't know a lot about the world and he is kind of too trusting of people. He's naive, all that sort of stuff. And then it's around this point where he actually starts making active decisions for himself and with a noble goal in mind, and that's what ultimately leads to him becoming a real boy. So like if you have him being blown around by the winds of fate throughout the movie, which is kind of what happens, and then at this point when he goes to help Geppetto, and at this point where it's his idea, his ingenuity and his craftsmanship and all that sort of stuff that like gets them out of it, that's actually really really good, because then that's him becoming a real boy in a very real sense. He's not a puppet anymore.
yeah, that's what I that's what I like about it.
Yeah, it's really good. I really like this movie. It's so good. And so then they light the fire, and all this black smoke is billowing into the mouth of Monstro. He's not too pleased about it, and he starts like sneezing it out. And eventually, they're paddling up in their raft, trying to get out of his mouth. They sneeze, and it blows them out. But then, of course, Monstro is not very happy about what just happened, and now he's trying to kill them. And they say explicitly just as much. The monster is just trying to destroy them at this point, and he's chasing them around, and all the water effects are fucking awesome, to put it
And the way that
mildly.
it's like the belly, the actual belly of the, like the outside of belly of Monstro, the pencil strokes on that, or the pencil mark lines on that, and the way they move, it's really
Yeah,
striking. It's a really
yeah.
incredible piece of animation.
Oh yeah, and I always quite liked that, like when he's blowing all that black smoke out of him, there's like this weird mashup of this, obviously this image of nature. Obviously it's a giant whale, it's a sea creature and all that sort of stuff, and it's in the water, but like the sort of almost industrial kind of smoke coming out of it, there's something a little, I don't know, it makes me think of like industrial machinery a little bit, just like the way it's billowing out of him. There's a weird amalgamation there that I find quite interesting.
Well, and it's interesting.
All the design choices are incredible.
We didn't quite. We didn't mention this part, but earlier on, well, we mentioned some of it, but earlier on in the very first scene when Pinocchio comes to life and then accidentally lights his own finger on fire, right? Geppetto extinguishes it by stuffing it into the fishbowl, which makes the fish sneeze and cough.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah,
it's a little.
It's a little in the business. We call this foreshadowing.
And that's a really nice one because it's not necessary at all, but it's just a great touch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's that sensation you get from good writing where you feel like everything is meaningful and important. And like it's just there's nothing better really than that feeling, but like you're in solid hands and that like everything they're presenting you with has meaning to it. There's not a lot of like wasted time or like threads that don't go anywhere and stuff like that. That's a really nice touch. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of the one of my favorite little moments from Jurassic Park, where they're talking later. It'll be a whole thing where like I thought all these dinosaurs were female, but life finds a way. All that sort of stuff. You know, where the frogs spontaneously change sex if the environment calls for it. When they're flying into the island and they're going down in the helicopter and there's some turbulence and Grant can't find the male end of the seatbelt, so he grabs two female ends and ties them together.
Oh yeah, damn. Yeah, that's really shit.
It's a really nice detail. That's an even more subtle one, but that one really, that's a great moment. Whoever's idea that was, fucking great. I don't know if that's I don't remember if that's a Michael Crichton thing from the book or something.
Yeah, it's been a while since I read that. I would like to read that again, though. That I really enjoyed that book.
I like the book too. It is quite a bit different from Jurassic Park, but in a way that I like both of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, same. I mean, I'd like to rewatch Jurassic Park at like soon at some point. Maybe we could do that for a stream like soon. Yeah,
I'm always down for that. Topaz Dude says, based on everything y'all have said, I will not be rushing out to read this book. I suppose that's a good. Yeah, I was about to ask. It doesn't sound like you would recommend it, really.
Not really. I mean, it is interesting to listen to. It's kind of fun at times, but I'm also not a huge fan of going and rereading like some of these older children's books all the time. And this one's okay, but I don't think it's something that
it just seems like a lot of the changes that we've talked about. I just find this movie more compelling.
Yeah, if you're interested in this kind of thing and like the way that adaptation happens, then like there are other ways that you can better spend your time. Probably this one's quick though. So yeah, it's a 5-hour audio book, which means that you could probably read it total to yourself in like maybe 3 hours at most, maybe less, depending on how quick you read. So like if you're interested in that kind of thing, maybe, but it's it's not, I wouldn't say it's a necessary, like something that I would highly recommend or anything.
Yeah. Right, so they're being chased around by Monstro, and he's a mean son of a bitch, and he's trying to kill him. And Geppetto and Pinocchio are panicking,
I really also he's chasing them, but like they get out, and then with the sneeze, but then he like takes a deep breath in before sneezing again, and they end up back in there. Yeah, and then like getting out, it's very tense.
Yeah. Oh, it's legitimately pretty suspenseful and scary. There's a nice so there's a big moment where Monstro actually crashes into their raft, destroying the raft and separating the two. Pinocchio's looking for Geppetto, and Geppetto is kind of floating on a log, and he's like, "Save yourself, Pinocchio, save yourself," which is a great touch because, I mean, of course Geppetto would say that. It's perfectly in his character, and it's like almost a noble thing to say. But Pinocchio's whole arc is not being selfish
Yeah.
and being selfless. And so of course he goes to save his dad, and it's a really nice moment. But Monstro's coming, and there's this great moment where he also gets another moment to sort of be active in the story and do something smart to save himself and Geppetto. Monstro's steaming towards him like a freight train. He sees him coming, and he swims quickly towards the rocks and sort of slips into a narrow part between the rocks to save himself and Geppetto from Monstro. Monstro comes crashing into the rocks, and there's this giant, cataclysm of water and rock and everything. It's a great big suspenseful moment. I love all the birds flying around. Sorry, I'm watching it right now as it's happening with all the water spraying everywhere and the seagulls and everything. It's just so chaotic in a really fun way. And so it pushes them through the rocks, and it stops Monstro in his tracks, and and Geppetto washes up on shore. And one of my favorite, I used it a lot in the Wisecrack video, but one of my favorite moments in this movie is the snap zoom on dead Pinocchio.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I love it because I just love snap zooms so much. Some of you may know that about me.
I also really so one of the things that I really found kind of funny is the whole time when we were doing that, Nikki was like, "So the cat and the fish are dead," and then they just sort of float up at the end, like, "Ah, yeah, no, don't worry, they're here. There they are. Look, Figaro and the fish. Like,
it's okay. They survived.
It's okay. They're good. They're good."
Jiminy, Figaro, Cleo, and Geppetto all alive, and
Pinocchio dead.
No, he's dead. Oh, and the snap zoom. There it is. Oh, it's so good. I love it so much.
It is nice.
There are no other snap zooms in the whole movie, but
that's a good point. Jay Jameson just raised this as it's a really good point. The connection with locomotives makes the whale smoking interesting. Maybe like the fact that it looks like a train. Like
it does. It does kind of look like a giant train or a steam engine barreling towards you. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the black smoke is very evocative as an image. As this like giant sea serpent that's spewing like engine smoke out of its mouth. It's really cool.
Yeah, so he's dead. Pinocchio is dead.
The end. Thank you all for tuning in.
That's how the book ends. Pinocchio is dead. He was lynched in the book. This time he drowned, saving his father.
Kind of bleak, but so it goes.
So yep. Disney
just kidding. Just kidding. He doesn't actually die because Disney wants to ruin culture. So instead, he's brought back home, and everyone's mourning him, and everything's very sad and everything. And then the fairy's disembodied voice enters, and it says, what does it say? Well, there's a nice lighting change, first of all, because the mood is kind of somber and everything. And before she even says anything, there's a lighting change that happens. It's like lighting cue, where things get brighter, things get more blue. And then the fairy says, "Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish. And someday you will be a real boy." And then that beautiful, like, starburst thing. And then he comes back to life, and he no longer has the donkey ears, and he no longer has the donkey tail, and he has more normal human-like proportions now. He says, "Father, what are you crying for?" And he says, because you're dead, Pinocchio." He says, "No, I'm not." He says, "Yes, you are." "Now lie down." That's such a funny line. It's like, "Yes, you are. Now lie down." He says, "But father, I'm alive, see?" And then it registers. Yeah. And he says, "And I'm a real boy," and that's when it registers for Geppetto. And it's beautiful reunion. Everyone's happy and smiling, and then there's dancing and cheering, and he's picking him up in his arms, and they're spinning around in circles. The cat and the fish. The cat jumps into the fish bowl and gives the fish a kiss, which is another great little moment because earlier
cat has a little bit of an arc too. Yeah, Figaro the cat has a little arc.
A little bit, because it's almost like, he doesn't have any children. He has this cat and this fish. It's almost like the way they're presented is a bit like the fish is his daughter, the cat is his son, because the son's a little bit more of like he's a little brattier, in a way, like, okay, so when he's like, now say goodnight to Cleo, like give her a kiss, and he's like, no, I don't want to. It has this energy of like, no, I don't want to kiss my sister. Girls are icky, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of a little bit the vibe. And then at the end, he's so happy and he's rejoicing at Pinocchio coming back to life that he does a little somersault backflip thing into the water and gives the fish a kiss. It's a fun little moment. He gets a little arc, Figaro does. And then they all start smacking the clocks and everything's going and playing music and clanging and bells, and it's all it's a really nice moment. I really like all.
Yep.
And then he's playing his little concertina, very Italian. And they're singing and dancing, and Jiminy has this another fourth wall breaking moment where he says, well, this is practically where I came in. It's just a nice little moment. He's got his little outfit on. He's dancing. He sees the star twinkling in the sky, and so he goes outside. And he opens the window and he goes outside so he can talk with the blue fairy. And this is another really nice moment. I just want to get the dialogue exactly right. And he says, "Thank you, milady. He deserved to be a real boy. It was sure nice of you too." And then he's interrupted, and then the lighting happens on him. This blue spotlight kind of appears on him, and he's like, What's going on?" And then the starburst pattern appears, and he gets his little badge. It says "Official Conscience," and it's got like little, like, I don't know, pearl looking things, and it's gold, and it's shimmering and shiny, and it says that it's 18 carats, which is pretty nice for a badge.
Yeah.
He says solid gold too. And he says, "Well, I think it's swell." And he kind of like, it's great. And then that's basically it. Then we return to When You Wish Upon a Star, which is clearly Walt Disney's favorite thing in the world, is granting wishes.
Except if except if you're a voice actor and your wish is to have credit.
Oh no. I quite like the lyrics of this song too. It's like, when your heart is in a dream, no request is too extreme, all that sort of stuff. It's good. And we get this nice shot of the sort of North Star, the wishing star twinkling in the sky, and we see the nice village beneath the mountains and everything. And the end.
The end, and it ends on the swell that Disney has become famous for.
Mm-hmm.
And
it says, "Your dreams come true. The end, a Walt Disney production," which is the most Disney thing ever, probably. Yeah, it's a great little movie.
It's a really good movie. Really good little movie.
It's one of my favorites.
Hitting dingers. Disney is. These first two are home runs.
Yeah. I like this one even like quite a bit more than Snow White, and that's saying something because I really like Snow White. Yeah, but this one, man, this one just there's so much more drama to it. I would say it's so much more intense and stressful and horrifying, but then wholesome at the end. It's there's a stronger character arc in terms of improving as a person and going on a journey, all that sort of stuff. There's a great little moral lesson in there that's, I guess, at worst a little preachy, but like it's so, I don't want to say inoffensive. I want to say like fundamental and basic and like unobjectionable that like it's hard to be mad
anyway. Yeah.
It
should be relatively unobjectionable.
Well, someone said this earlier. I don't remember who said it, so sorry for not giving you credit. But someone said something to the effect of like, there's a moral lesson about how like hedonism is bad, so no wonder Wisecrack didn't like it, or something. It was some comment along those lines, and it made me laugh. But yeah, it's a pretty basic, fundamental, wholesome, affirmative kind of story with nice values. It's a little on the nose, no pun intended, in some ways. That's probably the worst thing you could say about it, honestly, is that there's some things that are like, oh, like don't be a jackass, like, or you'll turn into a jackass. It's like, yeah, like, oh, I got it.
Yeah,
but it's simple and it's for kids and it's effective, and I think it has enough darkness in there that it doesn't feel too cloyingly sweet or anything along those lines. It's an important moral message and it's told well. But I also do think that for all I've joked about, like, being unsubtle in a lot of ways, there's enough deeper imagery there that it's not just a surface level sort of finger wagging moral lesson. There's enough that like grips you in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make it powerful.
The dangers of eating at Red Lobster, big thing for this movie.
JMS, I joined late as all get out, but did you all talk about how terrifying the sound design for the Monstro was? No, we didn't. But that's we talked a bit about the rest of his visual design, but yeah, the sound design, the like shrieking's not the right word, but like the bellowing, the monstrous sounds he makes. I wish I knew exactly what those sounds are because they're very evocative. They're very intense. They're very well designed. Yeah, he's a terrifying beast, that Monstro. Especially, I mean, I remember seeing this as a kid. Absolutely terrifying in the best sort of way.
Yeah. It really it really does do a very good job at like retaining the terror. So like we've been talking about, right? The original book is intended to be like a very harsh warning, clearly.
Yes.
Right? But this does a really good job of retaining the fright, the frightening aspect, while removing the parts that I think you could argue are, pretty like objectionable for a child's for a protagonist that is a child, right?
Yeah.
I think it does a really good job at balancing that. Disney knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing when he was writing these things.
He sure did. I think he strikes a really great balance. One thing I want to talk about really briefly is that I think sometimes, and this I think was embodied a bit in the Wisecrack video, and I've definitely seen this elsewhere. There's like two extremes and I find both of them frustrating. Extreme number one is that children need to be protected from anything dark or scary or tense entirely because they can't handle it or whatever. So everything needs to be just like pretty shapes and colors and silly, stupid, annoying, repetitive songs and all that sort of stuff. Like the dumbing down, the softening of children's entertainment. That's like one extreme, right? And that's sort of what Wisecrack accuses this of being, which it totally isn't. I think it's actually the perfect balance. Because the other extreme is there's really no such thing as childhood innocence, which is kind of the more the more gross extreme. Like that's obviously way worse. And I think you see that pathologized in some people in a really, really ugly way. But there's this idea that like, oh, well, why shouldn't you just show kids like the harsh realities of life and storytelling? And it's like, well, no, because I do think, there is an extent to which you need to like protect children from the worst evils in the world in storytelling, not just in like actual life. You know what I mean? Like not to get too in the weeds here, but I remember seeing this really gross tweet from ContraPoints a couple years ago talking about how childhood innocence was a myth. And I was like, oh my God, the fuck is wrong with you? There's all sorts of things you could say about where that thought process leads. But one of the things that I just wanted to focus on there was the idea like, well, are you just going to like tell a 2-year-old about what necrophilia is, for example? Or are there some things that you don't need to tell
let's
kids
just
about?
read, instead of reading kids bedtime stories, like like The Hobbit or anything like that, like why don't we just read them Child of God by Cormac McCarthy? Fuck it.
Yeah, why not?
Push them off the deep end if and they'll either sink or swim. Let's read Blood Meridian to our 3-year-old.
Yeah. And so, like, obviously, those both extremes create problems. I would say one more problems than the other.
That's why Requiem for a Dream should be required viewing for all 4th graders.
Well, then, you could actually, this does take on the first extreme does take on an especially pathological form, is that you like try to shelter and protect your kids from the world entirely. And then, when they do encounter the ugliness of the world, it just destroys them. So like, there are extremes in both directions that are both really bad. And I kind of hate the criticism of like these early Disney movies that they are the former. It's like, no, there's
No, they're not.
quite a bit of the dark realities of life. Like Pinocchio is like swindled and conned by people. He's sold into slavery. His life is threatened like
Well, somebody
several
pointed out
times
too that
over.
like the coachman never faces repercussions for what he did, right? Like like
Oh,
they don't have that happen. Like those kids are stuck. Those kids who turned
yeah,
into donkeys, they're stuck.
yeah, yeah. Lampwick is not coming back. He's gone. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like he sees one of his few friends he's ever made his age turn into a donkey in a horrifying manner. Like this isn't all sunshine and rainbows, guys. Just because it ends on a hopeful note of the possibility of redemption and all that sort of stuff and reunification, that doesn't mean that the horror wasn't there in the middle, because it certainly was.
Yeah.
And I certainly remember being quite terrified of the middle of this movie as a kid.
And I think I mentioned this during the Snow White one, but I'm going to talk about it again. There's a book called The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. I think he's a psychologist who writes about. I highly recommend reading this one to anybody in the chat. Like, if you're looking for a book to read that isn't Pinocchio, pick up The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall, because it goes through the purpose, like the potential evolutionary purpose for storytelling, for dreams, for play, for all that kind of stuff, that that kids are involved in. And in a lot of cases, he studied children playing together in kindergarten rooms, right? And one of the things that he noticed is that when left to their own devices, they come up with some rather fucked up scenarios for themselves. Like kids, even little girls who people like, he talks about this in the book about how, like, well, little boys are always, they talk about how, like, they play rough, right? Like they run around, they pretend like they have guns, their swords, they're
Like
fighting
cowboys
and
and
all that.
Indians and
They play
shoot
that
each
kind of
other.
thing, and girls
They go,
play
no, I
house.
got you, and you go, no, you missed.
Yeah, exactly. And like girls play house and all. Like little girls tend to play house or play, like mommy or whatever, things like that. But even the little girls playing those, what you would think are more innocuous, less frightening games, most of the time when like he talks to these girls and asks them to tell him the story of the play, a lot of them are like, oh yeah, my baby fell down a well and there's a tiger that's trying to eat it, and so I need to sneak beneath the tiger so that it doesn't see me, so that I can rescue my baby from a well,
Yeah.
right? Like they are constantly imagining these really dark, terrifying scenarios, and it's something that I think we don't give kids like enough credit for. Like they come up with this shit on their own, and in these instances it's sort of a fantastical sort of thing, the evolutionary purpose of which unclear. He I think theorizes that maybe it's preparing them for the dangers of the real world, the dangers of life. Like it's kind of like dreams sort of having the possibly biological purpose of preparing you for scenarios in the real world. Like a simulation theory of dreams is like you go through.
It's like a lot of times it's like a meditation kind of subconsciously on problems that you haven't really solved consciously yet.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? There's a lot of that. Like a lot
there's
of
a lot of, and he throws a lot of different theories out there, just sort of to look at. But I think it's something that like people tend to forget, especially now, that kids can come up with some pretty fucked up stuff even in the absence of
yeah
like of seeing these, reading rated R or watching rated R movies, or like reading fucked up books, right? Like
yeah
that comes naturally to human beings, the idea of like a dangerous world full of threats. And movies like Pinocchio do, I think, a pretty good job of showing the good and the scary. And they feel like, this one in particular, I think, feels a lot like a kid's dream. And like I think seeing that on the screen, like one of the things that kids would probably be terrified of this for is because they're seeing something that like on the screen that like corresponds to corresponds to the danger, like that they feel as a natural instinct, right? Like I think that's really interesting. So yeah, I just I think the kids can handle things a little bit more than the people who try to sanitize uh, want to deal with. Of course, at the same time, you don't want to give them all that Cormac McCarthy trauma from an early age. We don't need to turn everybody into a bunch of cynical, hopeless Western writer and Western crime writers. But Pinocchio, I think, does a real, and Snow White to some extent as well. But Pinocchio, they all do a really good job of it.
I agree. I think a big part of where the middle ground, where the balance is just being truthful in the storytelling. Like, for example, this is kind of like this. Obviously, this is fantastical. This story, it's not realistic or naturalistic, but like in terms of what it says about the human experience, it's true.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, this is how the world works. This is how people work. You know what I mean? And there's truth in it. If it were softened to the point where there's not, where the ugliness is kind of sanitized, then it's not really as true. Or if it's like made really cynical and there's no path for redemption and like no one's ever doing things for the right reasons, anything like that, that's not true either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I think really what a good story like this does in its own sort of like fantastical fairy tale like way is just mirror the way things are, like phenomenologically for people. Like, this is how the world is. You know what I mean? That's where the balance is just the balance is in like representing things the way they are, because that's what life is. It's like there's the light and the dark and all that sort of fun stuff.
Absolutely. Yep. Disney's Blood Meridian. Oh, the chat froze up again. That's okay. We're winding down here. Disney's Blood Meridian. That'd be interesting. Oh, and Neil Gaiman too. Yeah, Neil Gaiman is another one who has that. He really does have that sort of grasp on what, like, I mean, he wrote a lot of his kids' stuff for his own kids. So I think he looked a lot at what his kids were fascinated by and then wrote them stories about it. But like, yeah, I remember I've read Coraline, I've read The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Those are all books about children that have very, like, they're nightmares, they're nightmare plays. But they work in a good balance of the redemptive, the good and the bad, the way that a good children's story does, right?
Absolutely.
A well-told story puts us in touch with the truth. Yeah, that's an apt thing for Tolkien to have said, I think. Yeah.
He did good on that one. He cooked with that one.
He cooked.
Well, all right. Do you have any closing thoughts on Pinocchio?
Stay away from Red Lobsters, guys. That's where they're eating with the Coachman. That is consistent through the book and the thing. They go to the Inn of the Red Lobster. That's just the original Red Lobster.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
So yeah, Red Lobsters. That's where you get kidnapped. Watch out. Yeah. Epstein's hunting ground.
Oh my goodness. So what's the next one on the list?
The next one's Fantasia is the next.
Oh, Fantasia.
Because that came out the same year. We might have to double up on that one with Dumbo. I'm not 100% sure. I'll talk to you about that a little bit.
Yeah, we'll either do, because Fantasia is a little lighter in the story department, you could say. Yeah, so I'm fine with doubling up with Dumbo, because I think, well, I'm excited to rewatch it. I shouldn't speak too soon, but I think Dumbo is maybe a little thin in the story department as well compared to some of them. Maybe, or maybe I'm just misremembering it. So,
yeah, it's been a while since I've seen it. I remember the crows.
I remember the pink elephants on parade. That's what I remember from Dumbo.
Yeah. I'm excited to jump into Fantasia too, because that Mickey Mouse, the Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey Mouse one is one of my favorite cartoons of all time as a kid. It's great. Loved that. So
yeah.
That came out the same year as Pinocchio, actually. Fantasia was November of 1940, and Pinocchio was February of 1940. So they did a little back-to-back thing there, which is really impressive considering how many animators they had on.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, and another interesting little fact, Pinocchio they had planned Pinocchio to be the third of the animated features that they released. Bambi was going to be the second, but they had a real problem with the animations with Bambi, which is also based on a book.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they pushed Pinocchio, they fast tracked Pinocchio, and then did Dumbo, and then did Bambi. So Bambi got bumped twice.
Interesting. For like technical reasons, they couldn't quite.
They couldn't get the animal. The thing that I read was that they were having a very difficult time getting the animals right, which is strange because they didn't seem to have much of a problem with it in Snow White. That seemed like that was
yeah.
That was.
I mean, maybe there was just more that needed to rely on the animals. Like more of the movie rested on the animals being compelling than in Snow White. I guess you could say in terms of because they speak and they have emotions and all that sort of fun stuff. Maybe that's why in terms of getting the expressiveness.
Yeah, that's very possible. But yeah, so apparently that was the difficulty. So be very interested to jump.
Trayvon Washington asks, "Wait, are you watching Dumbo or Dumbo First Blood?" Good joke.
Very funny.
Yeah, all the animals have more personality in Bambi. I'm sure that's part of it too, because that's kind of an interesting line to have to walk with the whole talking animals thing.
Yeah,
because there's a little bit of that in this movie with the sort of fox character, but they're very anthropomorphic in this, I should say.
Very much.
Anyway, that'll about do it for our discussion of Pinocchio. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for the super chats. We certainly appreciate them. A lot of good stuff in chat today. There was a funny joke I want to acknowledge because I don't know if you saw it, Hugh. Well, Topaz said something to the effect of, "I remember watching a lot of R-rated movies that I feel helped form who I am as a person when he was young." And J.J. Jameson says, "Well, some R's are harder than others." That was a good joke, and I wanted to acknowledge it before we leave. Yes, some R's are indeed harder than others. Thank you very much for watching, for hanging out with us on this Sunday. Yeah, it's a good note to end on, I think. We'll see you next time. I don't know what we're covering next time. It won't be Fantasia immediately.
Not immediately.
But soon, in a 2 or maybe 3 weeks, we're gonna keep this train going with all the 2D animated Disney movies. So there's a lot of good stuff to get to there. We'll keep covering new stuff as it comes out. This is
and
kind
as
of
it interests us, and as we can see it. We were gonna do Cuckoo last week, but I could not. I live in the slums, like out in the sticks, and I could not find a theater that was playing Cuckoo, which is probably, honestly, to my benefit.
Probably okay. Honestly, it wasn't getting amazing reviews, and I didn't want to have to like drive a half an hour myself to see another mediocre horror movie because there's just been so many duds this year. It's kind of a bleak year in a lot of respects.
I'm really tired of watching stuff that sucks. I gotta be honest. I really enjoy watching Snow White and Pinocchio has been just a little bit of extra light in my life lately.
Rejuvenating, yes, refreshing.
It's another thing about a well-told story, right? Is that you tap into that little bit of truth in humanity, and you remember that oh yeah, there is good storytelling out there. It really reconnects you with what it looks like. It's
nice. Just the experience of a good work of art, just that with the animation and the music and the performances all coming together with the story to form something, just that in and of itself is it's really nice. It's very rejuvenating feeling. It's a shame we don't get more of that, I would say. Yeah. I wanted to look up really quick before we go what's even coming out soon, just because I'm curious. Let's see, this is the one where most of the movies will be. What is Blink Twice?
Oh, that's that Channing Tatum movie where he kidnaps... It's another one where he takes people to a hedonistic island. It ties in,
Oh, it's on theme.
It would be on theme. Oh, they're remaking The Crow.
The Crow. Oh, I've heard dire things about that. Have you seen the original The Crow? I have not.
I have, yeah. My dad was a big Bruce Lee fan, and so he, with Bruce Lee's son being the main guy in The Crow, who died on the set of The Crow.
Yeah, I know that much, but I have not seen the movie. I don't know anything about it.
It's imagine if you will Donnie Darko.
I don't have to imagine. I've seen it.
Yeah, I have not. Maybe that. Yeah, but anyway. From what I gather, it's like Donnie Darko, but superhero stuff.
Well, whether The Crow's any good or not, I have no idea. But the new one apparently is awful. That's what everyone keeps saying, and that's a shame because I do like Bill Skarsgård, and I would like him to be in good things. Please be in more good things. Coraline's 15th anniversary. That might be an interesting movie to check out because I've actually never seen Coraline.
Oh, really?
I know. What, Strange Darling. Oh, there's a half in the bag on that movie, but I know nothing about it. Whisters is still out. Trap, Despicable Me 4, Inside Out 2, Borderlands. My Penguin Friend.
Borderlands. I watched a review of Borderlands and I started playing Borderlands 1 again. I started replaying the original game instead. It's like, that's a shame. I actually really liked that. The game is fucking fun, man. I don't know if you've ever played it. It is a blast. It's just a looter shooter grind fest out in the desert with like Mad Max vibes. It's fucking fun. It's a good time. I have not played the third one. I stopped after 2. I did not play the pre-sequel or anything, but I've been having a great time with that in my downtime.
Donald's Angry says, "Bye guys. Talk about Hook when you do Peter Pan, please. Hook's awesome." That is one of the most baffling things I've ever come across in my engagement with film criticism is how poorly reviewed Hook is, because I had no idea what anyone thought of Hook, and I saw Hook and I was like, yeah, Hook's fun. I like it. You look at the reviews, they're terrible.
Wait, really?
Yes.
I like that movie. What the fuck?
Yes, it's a good movie. It has a 29% on Rotten Tomatoes.
What?
Let's see. Let's click on the actual all critics. So if you look at the actual score and not the way they dumbly weight things, it would be a 4.7 out of 10, which is still outrageous. Outrageous.
Gene Siskel, a woefully uneven retelling of the Peter Pan story.
Oh, fuck off, Siskel. I know I'm like wearing your face right now, but you're so wrong. You're so wrong. Hook's fun. Yeah, I don't know why people hate so much on Hook. It's funny. I was watching a documentary. Some of it was a bit like masturbatory, but some of it was pretty good. It was about Steven Spielberg's career thus far. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. No mention of Hook at all, but they spent forever on Munich, and I'm just like, ugh.
That's a shame.
Yes.
He really wants Munich to have been a thing.
You know what? I like Hook. I will defend Hook.
Well, I mean, that is interesting because I did want to try to do. I know Steven Spielberg is a little bit of a prolific guy, but I have been interested in revisiting some of his.
Yeah, I have been as well. I'm a big fan of a lot of Steven Spielberg's work. I think he has some duds. I think his prime is a bit past him, but he's still making some interesting stuff. His best movies are some of my favorite movies of all time. I'm a big fan of his, so I wouldn't mind doing a Steven Spielberg arc at some point. But there's just so many movies to cover. But especially if the movies coming out this year just don't seem all that great, I'm fine with just going to revisit some classics. So maybe we'll start that. Have you ever seen Duel, his first movie, his
no
TV movie about a guy trying to kill someone with a 18-wheeler?
I haven't.
Fun. I like it. I was watching it because I was watching a number of directors' first movies to try and see what I could glean about their first movies and how they were successful, what they did. Anyway, Duel's fun. Duel's got some really cool stuff, and they filmed it all in 11 days, which is nuts. Anyway, Steven Spielberg, an interesting character.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that could be a fun one.
Jay Jameson is pitching Margin Call again. He's mentioned this multiple times, and I feel like we should watch it at some point. Margin Call. I keep forgetting. Oh yeah, it's the one with the really stacked cast. You know what? Fuck it. We will review that one.
Yeah, screw it. Let's do that.
There's a guarantee. I don't know when it'll happen, but that's the guarantee. You will see a review of that. You've asked enough times. You've hit the threshold, and now it's going to happen at some point. So stay tuned for that. Spielberg hates Hook. It's insane. Twin Perfect, despite all his baggage, has an excellent Hook video. Interesting that Spielberg doesn't like Hook because he's wrong, right? I'm assuming Spielberg likes his own West Side Story, and he's wrong about that
he's been
too.
wrong before. He made Ready Player One. He was wrong.
Oh God,
he was wrong to do that.
Well, what's her name? The woman who's gonna be Snow White, even though she sucks. Rachel Zegler. That's Steven Spielberg's fault as well because he cast her for the first time in West Side Story, which is terrible. So you can blame her on him as well.
he's really stacking up the wrongs towards the end of the career here. You know that.
Well, you know he's still got some hits. I really like the
Fabelmans was really good. Yeah, I did enjoy that.
The Fabelmans. You know, I think as a craftsman, he's still quite talented, even if he doesn't pick the best scripts like he used to. That's okay. That's all right.
Got to pay the bills somehow.
I mean, the best movies he's ever made are so good. I'll forgive almost anything he does. Since it's like you're already one of the best of all time, even if everything you make for the rest of your life sucks. You've already. I mean,
yeah.
There's so many to name. It's not even. It's pointless. You already know.
Just like Coppola.
Well. Megalopolis is going to be an experience, and I'm actually quite excited for that because I just find that interesting.
Yeah.
The whole story of how he got it made with his own money, all the controversies surrounding it. I kind of can't wait. I think it's going to be a mess, and I'm looking forward to it. Well, all right. Those are some things you can look forward to in the future. Thanks again for hanging out. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.